Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Holy cow. Literally.
Holy cow.
Holy cow. That was wild, bro. For those who, watched our live stream 20 minutes ago, I had lightning storms and it was hitting every dude. Baal Hadad was storming the hell out of outside right now. And I'm like, okay, hold on. Is that Azazel? Who is it? So you were giving your background and rudely, it like automatically went into an outro as I was trying to escape my phone to come back onto the StreamYard.
Right.
And I'm like, we're just cracking the surface. Like we're just barely.
What was crazy about your outro is that it was you ejecting from the Matrix. And literally the last word I'm pretty sure that came out of my mouth on the stream was the Matrix, because I was explaining that I was explaining my backstory with the Daniel fast and how I got into all of this that we're going to talk about. But basically I was using the analogy that Daniel's first step out of the Matrix of the system of Babylon was refusing the king's food, the flesh and the wine and everything. And literally, as I said, out of the Matrix, your outro came on. And then I saw someone in the chat say, "Is this the Matrix?" Haha. Because we talk about in our film Christspiracy, we talk about the Matrix, which is this idea of this propagandized deception that we don't see all around us, that's continuously putting it in our face, this whole kind of ritual blood consumption system with animals and everything, which we can get into. But bottom line, it couldn't have been more serendipitously timed, that intro coming in.
Not intentional. Not on my intentions, at least. And
that was so Azazel was coming at you with the storm deity attack, but then Yeshua or the Nazarene energy was maybe thrusting the Matrix.
Yeah,
in there
literally. And then we had 2 super chats, and I know Ross Nichols was one of them. And he was saying nobody better than you to have for this topic. He was just giving you a shout out. See, I committed an unforgivable sin with Ross while we were over there at the Dead Sea. And that was, my wife wanted me to get some sea salt from the Dead Sea to bring back and smuggle back into the States. Which we didn't think it was smuggling at the time until I realized we went through, actually, they took us and said, hey, you need to go over here to whatever the deeper check is. And we're like, what? Hold on, why are we having to go over here to this? Like, they're doing like a deeper check. And the guy goes, do you have anything in your luggage that's like, he was naming off like bombs, stuff like that. And I'm like, no, what? And he's like, okay. And he let me through. Come to find out later when we unpacked, like I had literally, it was like a tea bottle that was Ross's, and it had like this much tea left in it. So when I found it, I poured out the little bit of tea and went and got my sea salt. And he's like, hey, where's my sweet tea? And I'm like,
don't take a Southern man sweet tea now. That's a cardinal sin.
I know, but I'm trying to redeem myself with Ross, and it doesn't seem I'm going to be forgiven at all. I'm doing everything I can. This guy he won't forgive me. And there was this verse I heard somewhere from some book, 70 times 7, but I guess he just disregards that. I don't understand. So anyway, what were you talking?
He said, my wife made me. Isn't that what Adam said?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Anyway, so you were getting in. We exited the Matrix. Now we're going back into the Matrix. Let's talk more about your background, and then we'll get back into the weeds. And for those who are just now tuning in, we will make a brief comment about the red heifer, because that is the title of this video, and someone might come in and go, whoa, what are you talking about? How is this related? And we need to be able to address that again.
Yeah, so definitely go back and watch our part 1 of this debate before Derek's storm attack. But To briefly kind of cover it, last night I got a message from someone on the ground in Israel that this defunct red heifer had just been burned in a rehearsal for the real thing, which they are definitely planning to do whenever that comes. But I was taken back by it because I've been following this red heifer story for years now. It's a part of our film Christspiracy, which we're going to talk about today, which is really talking about ritual, animal sacrifice, bloodshed, violence, animal consumption at the nth degree. And essentially, because of following this story, I've received so many different feedbacks from people about the film. And one of the most challenging ones was that when we went to cinemas back in May of 2024, we went worldwide into cinemas with this film, Christspiracy. And it was not too long after the October 7th attack and everything. It was just earlier that October. And this red heifer bit was a part of our film. Then, however, the theatrical releasing company that sent us out worldwide, who put out films from like Coldplay and Taylor Swift and this and that, it came down to the wire and they said, hey, can we cut this red heifer bit out of the film? And we were like, what's
really?
Yeah, exactly. And so a little backstory up to that moment. Back when we made this film, we had a contract with Netflix to go straight to Netflix as a Netflix original. And Netflix was trying to censor stuff out of the film, particularly around the Jesus, the Nazarene story, not Jesus of Nazareth, which we can talk about. But we refused to do it, to the point where it was to the detriment of our contract. We had to buy our rights back from Netflix, release independently, and all of that. So I had already been through that once. So we got this theater contract to be able to release independently into cinemas. And they're like, hey, can we cut this bit out? And so myself and my co-director kind of had to cut our losses and just say, look, we've done this one time. We just got to cut this piece out and just get it out there. And so we put it out to the world without the red heifer piece in cinemas. But now it's uncensored with this red heifer story on our website, Christspiracy.com. And we've just been following the development ever since, because, many people think this whole red heifer thing is just so outlandish sounding, especially to people who don't really know like biblical eschatology very much. Right. They're just like, what is going on? No, that's a fringe, that's got to be some small fringe cult thing going on or whatever. But I don't think people realize how serious it is, how much support it has from evangelical Christianity to Orthodox Judaism to governmental entities to big money. And now, what's really important about this event happening literally sometime in the last 24 to 48 hours, because Israel National News just reported that this heifer was burned. They've gone forward with a major step towards the progress of actually doing this, because before it's kind of like talk, oh, they may be building the altar, or they might be doing this, they might be doing that. But now we've got evidence of a literal animal being burned in ritual rehearsal with the priesthood, it says. So that's really serious. And I think will make people who think this is just some crazy talk think a little more about how real it is. So,
right. It's kind of odd to me that would be the choice they'd want cut, because there were moments where I'm watching that video where I'm seeing a cow hang. We're talking about mass meat type factory stuff. And I'm going, that remains in the video, and they didn't want that cut, but they're more concerned about this. That's weird. You kind of, not to be conspiracy theorist here, but like you kind of wonder, what is it? There are powers that be that are saying, hey, we're not interested in you fudging with this over here. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, it's all speculation. I think at minimum, this has to be true. At minimum, they're at least looking out for, the tensions around the world, because it wasn't too long after the attack and the onslaught of this, everything going on in the Middle East. And so maybe they were worried about, they were like, oh, the film's already so controversial. Like, let's not take it to the nth degree. Let's just, so maybe there was some of that. But even if that's all it was, I think it was more. But even if that's all that it was, that's still kind of like a strange reason to cut it. It's like, hey, man, shouldn't we just put the truth out? Maybe that can help even like give some perspective, de-escalate some things from going any further, because this red heifer being sacrificed, for those who don't know, it's the beginning of it's the first ritual towards building the third temple of Jerusalem. in Israel, so they can start more sacrifices there, more animal sacrifices. And, the tension around that is that from the Orthodox Judaism perspective, they want to be able to pray on the Temple Mount, all of that, totally understandable. But then from the opposing perspective with Al-Aqsa Mosque there and the Dome of the Rock and everything, the red heifer is kind of a signal of, hey, the other side or the other religion's coming to take over, right? And so that's what's creating all this, expedited religious tension in a lot of ways. And it could be total propaganda from the side of, say, Hamas, but the reality is one of their figureheads came out 100 days after the October 7th attack and said, hey, the red heifer is one of the reasons why October 7th happened. And they named it Al-Aqsa flood, the attack, because of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because they were saying, hey, we're here to protect it. Now, there's a lot that can be said about propagandizing something and how much of that is true, but that's what they said. So I think people knowing about this is really important.
Yeah, so that I'm glad you touched on the red heifer. Again, Israel News mentioned that this happened within the last 24 to 48 hours. So for those who didn't watch part one, the quickest summary I can give is we were talking about a thread that runs biblically. There's several threads, and there's not a single voice within the what we call Bible. And in this thread, leading from Genesis all the way down into Jesus, specifically nailing down Enoch, as Enoch is a commentary that further expounds what they're interpreting Genesis to imply with the sons of God, these giants and taking women and violence and corruption in the land, leads to this concept that the prophets talk about violence that is related to sacrificing with animals. And of course, also the violence on how they're treating their strangers, the neighbors, how there's so many aspects that are utilized in this. Going all the way down to Enoch, we see that commentary picked up. It's very clear there's cannibalism taking place of some sort, or at least eating of humans. Even I've seen that, like, they're hunting all the animals. Now they've got all the animals. Now they're looking for humans to eat because they don't have any more food. And so there's some theme that these ancient authors are seeing that is related to eating flesh and meat and all of this stuff. And then we get to Jesus. And Jesus is here at the temple calling them not just thieves or robbers, but calling them violent people. Like they're committing violence. And that would imply, it seems, he's against the temple cult and the sacrificial system of animals being sacrificed. So then he himself becomes the final once for all, kind of in certain context, Lamb of God. The final once for all sacrifice is a human who comes in and says, hey, we're putting an end and a stop to this. Some are even argue, if you get into some of the scholars who are more critical, they think that the Christianity might be a vacuumed reaction of a religion due to the destruction of the temple. So it's filling in the hole of, now we don't have a sacrificial system, but let's explain why, because we have a once for all in the death of the Messiah here that happens. And so we don't need a sacrificial animal. I mean, I'm just giving you different takes that some scholars have proposed.
Right. Well, why don't we do this? I want to start by covering this really crucial point, even in our film Christspiracy. It's kind of one of the climaxes, if not the climax of the film, is the revelation of this phrase, den of thieves, that Jesus quotes in the temple. I'm going to start there, and then from there, maybe let's work backwards, Hebrew Bible, of how can we see that this is a possible thread that Jesus is actually calling out. And then after we get back to Jesus, maybe we can go from there into the future, into the Nazarene tradition and some of that. So
if I break up because of a storm, just keep in mind, keep rolling, and hopefully within 5-10 minutes, I'm back. So anyway.
Okay. Hopefully they're not cloud seeding around there like I keep hearing is going on. So essentially what we talk about in Christspiracy is this question of the attack of the temple from Jesus, that regardless of what you think about the canonical gospels, most scholars who believe that Jesus is a historical figure, which is most scholars, think that this is one of the most historically reliable moments of the gospels. And there's even other threads that they draw from Judas the Galilean and other different, tangents that show that there was likely some type of anti-temple revolt event way before the whole Bar Kokhba and everything. So if we assume this is a historically attested event, what we have in the Gospels is we have Jesus showing up, and it says that in Mark's Gospel, which is our earliest Gospel, maybe arguably more reliable if you want to look at it that way, that Jesus actually goes the night before and does recon on the temple. So this isn't like when I was growing up in Sunday school and on Easter Sunday or Palm Sunday, when they told this story about Jesus going ham in the temple, pun intended again, is that Jesus is losing his temper, or it's a righteous anger that just overtakes him when he sees what's going on. But it really shifts the understanding when you read Mark's Gospel and you realize he went the day before as if he was doing recon. That's what Dr. Tabor says, you know. And if we take the numbers that the Gospels give, or maybe even Josephus about the Essenes, maybe somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 people deep are following this, you know, figure around, or in this movement that is heading towards the temple for some type of event, right? And so he shows up. It says in Mark's Gospel that he didn't allow anyone to bring merchandise in or out of the temple for a whole day. Now, the only merchandise being sold at the temple to any significance were animals for sacrifice. You know, Josephus records hundreds of thousands being slaughtered.
Literally, if I may, just to mention that one quote is in Josephus, The Jewish War, Book 7, Chapter 9, Paragraph 3. It says, now the number of sacrifices was 256,500. Now, I know they probably are, some experts probably say that's an exaggerated number, but even then, 256,000 is a ridiculous amount of animals to kill, but in like one Passover. It's
utterly ridiculous. And that's why in Christspiracy, without giving too much away, I'm going to give little hints, and I just encourage everyone to go watch it. But I went to the Temple Mount and investigated underneath the Temple Mount and went into a drainage channel or tunnel there, because I was looking, you know, I know slaughterhouse workers, and I've seen this in my activism and going around and looking and investigating and everything. The amount of entrails, bones, skin, blood, and everything that would be left over from an event like what Josephus is describing is insane, let alone the blood. And the Talmud and Mishnah, I believe, talks about priests wading up to their ankles in blood when the drainage channel got plugged at one point, it says. And I think the Hebrew word for that is the shishin, but there's this description of these holes at the base of the altar where the blood would flow down. So I was at the Temple Mount in the city of David, like trying to figure out, is there any evidence? Does anyone know about like a blood drainage system? And while I was there, I found out that one of the tunnels I was walking through, I was actually walking in it, because I expected it to be like a gutter hole or something small, but it was like overhead high, huge drainage system. Which
did it drain out to the valley? Because I've been there too. That valley is wide, a huge area that runs down.
Right. It would have drained out to the Kidron Brook right there between the Mount of Olives and the, you know, the it's where hell is. It's where there. What's that?
There's a few cool caves in that spot down there when you walk down the steps that take you all the way down there.
Totally. And it's famously, you know, Gehenna, the Jesus's destination for hell. But it makes you think that what was being, you know, addressed there, because there's even documentation. Again, I believe, I can't remember if it's the Talmud or the Mishnah. I get them confused, but one of them describes blood draining out into the Kidron Brook and all the way down to the Dead Sea, like blood. So, we're talking like a massive operation, if it's even a fraction of what these texts are describing, right? So, anyhow, Jesus shows up. He sees this massive slaughter operation, and then cutting to the chase, his famous statement, you know, in every Jesus film and what most pastors will deliver on Palm Sunday or Easter, my house, it is written. It is written. Now, notice he says it is written. He's referring back to the Hebrew Bible, kind of like when he says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. He's quoting Hosea 6:6. And he says, prefaces, go and learn what this means, as if he's saying, hey, everyone, go look at your own Bible and read what it actually says. Look at the context. What is really being said here? Similarly, it is written, my house is meant to be a house of prayer for all nations, quoting Isaiah, right?
Mhm.
but you have made it a den of thieves or robbers, as some translations say. Now, to your point that you made in part 1 of this chat, this is written in the Greek Gospels. So the word is lestes, right? Or lestonai. I can't remember the way the Greek is conjugated.
I
But
think, yeah.
yeah. But that word does translate as robber. But even in Greek, it's important to note that it's a separate word from like a petty thief. It's a robber who commits violence. So violence is implied. If you look up any lexicon, I mean, you can even pull it up now, lestes, it'll show the word violence will be included. It's kind of like, is it in Luke or Mark where the robbers leave the guy for dead?
The Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. Yeah.
Right. And so he's left for dead. And that's kind of, again, lending to this idea that there's a violence implied with even the Greek usage.
It's funny. Yeah. This, to add to your point, when I was reading the commentary by Del C. Allison Jr. on the double tradition we find in Matthew. So for those who don't know, Matthew has Jesus ride 2 donkeys instead of 1. Matthew has, 2 of these instead of 1. And there's always like this double. Well, when you get to the scenario where Jesus and then there's Barabbas, which by the way, the earliest text that we have say he's Jesus Barabbas,
right?
And Jesus. So you have a sacrificial lamb. One is the scapegoat, so to speak, that it carries the sins that you're letting free, and the other one is being sacrificed. And this seems to be what Matthew's playing on. But the point is, when Matthew's reworking Mark actually says very clearly in this passage, I should probably pull it up, where he says that this Barabbas was there in the insurrection. Okay. He's a violent contender. He's violent, right?
Right.
So they chose a violent person over someone who's clearly in the narrative not a violent person. Okay. However you view Jesus in the end of the day, because someone might say, well, his act in the temple was violent. Okay. Here's my point though. According to these narratives, the way that we're reading them, it sounds like, no, they're choosing they'd rather have a murderer, someone who literally commits murder, over Jesus. When Matthew rewrites this, they don't want to give the details that the insurrection was there, because whoever the author of Matthew was, according to Del Allison, it seems there's no way to read their mind or know exactly the motives. His perception was they're trying not to repeat the insurrection because they don't want Jesus that closely related to something that is dealing with the insurrection, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, if there's an insurrection, violent contenders, there's messianic claimants that are fighting against the system, causing violence too,
Well, and I would add to that famously Jesus is crucified between the 2 thieves, right? But the word there again is lestes. And Roman crucifixion was typically reserved for insurrectionists, for terrorists against the state. And it's this implied violence against the system, right? Now, what I find interesting about that, which will make more sense as I begin to tell more of this temple story, is that in a way, if there's truth to these claims, then it's almost like Jesus is being crucified and it's being projected onto him that which he was condemning, which we see happening even now, again, because what I'm going to posit here in a second is that Jesus was coming against the slaughter in the temple. And we're going to get into the text and how it proves that. But to jump to today's time, there are animal activists who go, like ALF is a famous one. There's this viral meme that's been going around. I see it all the time on big accounts, like really like The Scoop and all of this, where they're showing ALF and all the comments are like, how do I join that gang? Because it's guys who go in and put on ski masks and they go rescue bunny rabbits and chimpanzees and stuff from vivisection or from the, food industry or whatever. And it's just these gnarly looking, almost terrorist looking people, but they're like holding bunnies and saving them. Right. But the reality is that under the Patriot Act, the number 1 terrorist, domestic terrorists in America were these activists. They were labeled as the number 1 terrorists. Why is that? Well, if you fast forward to around the time when the Oprah show was really, really big, She had a guy named Howard Lyman on her show. He's known as the mad cowboy, because he was a cow farmer who blew the whistle on mad cow disease. And he was telling everyone, hey, they're feeding cow meat to cows and it's making them sick and giving them this disease. And because he blew the whistle on the truth about that, he and Oprah got drug into a like 10 or 15 year battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court, in such that by the time that happened and the Patriot Act after 9/11, there was this conglomeration between lobbyists for big animal ag and everything, so that they could pass a law. It's called an ag gag law, meaning that you cannot reveal harms of the animal agriculture industry, even if you're telling the truth. Before it was if you defame, right? If you do defamation in general, you're going to get sued if you're making false claims and hurting someone's business. But this law is, even if you tell the truth and it harms the business of animal agriculture, you can be labeled a domestic terrorist and you can face adequate jail time. And so I have friends that are on trial right now, facing 5, 10, 15 years worth of jail time for going to save turkeys or some chickens or some ducks from really brutal, disgusting, horribly inhumane scenarios, right? So I say all that to say I think it's interesting that Jesus is crucified as a terrorist when he himself was trying to call out the terror and literally said, you have made this a den of lestes, terrorists, violent insurrectionists in the Greek text. But now here's the catch, is Jesus is quoting the prophet Jeremiah when he says that. And remember, Jesus is confused, kind of like John the Baptist, is like, who is this guy? Is this Elijah? Is this, you know, they have all these ideas that he's a reflection of, a reincarnation of, a revisiting of these earlier prophets. And one of them is Jeremiah. They say, is he Jeremiah? Right? Because he's often quoting Jeremiah. Ross actually was the one who told me this, Ross Nichols. One of my favorite scriptures in the Gospels is when Jesus tells the fishermen to drop their, leave their profession behind. They drop their nets and they come and follow him and become fishers of men. I never realized Jeremiah, I think 16:16 it is, I believe. Ross pointed that out, that he's kind of quoting Jeremiah there, because he says that to make them fishers of men, to gather, people for the way, like fishers. Right. So he's constantly quoting Jeremiah. And then there's this big moment where he does what I like to call the ultimate prophet remix, where he mashes Isaiah, house of prayer, with boom, den of thieves, this juxtaposition. This is what it's supposed to be, but you've made it this. And when Jeremiah says den of thieves in Jeremiah 7:11 is what Jesus is quoting, Jeremiah is condemning the temple system as well. And he says it's a den of peretz is the Hebrew word. Now, spoiler alert, if anybody wants to pause and actually watch the film, I'm about to give away a big part of the film. So maybe if you don't want to give it away, pause this and come back to it.
They do need to go watch it either way. I mean, look, if I may, they can watch it right now. Right. And, if you're tugged at the heart and you really want to help pay this forward, okay, that's like my advice. Is that the best way to put this out there, is to say, hey, Absolutely. You can watch it right now. But if you're able to help, please help. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, if you watch now, it's free. All you got to do is plug in your email address. But if you do, like you said, feel called to pay it forward, it's the only way that we're keeping the machine of like trying to market this thing the best that we can through these pay it forward donations, which helps us keep it free. Eventually, if that runs out, maybe we'll have to go to like an Amazon or whatever. But again, we just don't want to face another one of these situations where someone's asking us to censor something. Right. So
dude, there's raw stuff in this video. I don't want it to be edited out. I think it needs to be in there, but okay, please continue.
Yeah. So anyhow, Jesus is quoting Jeremiah. Jeremiah says den of peretz. And now one of the climactic moments of the film is we actually ask a Oxford professor of Hebrew hermeneutics, this same question, and she's just caught off guard because she's never really thought of the fact, oh wait, yeah, Jesus is quoting Jeremiah. Well, what does the Hebrew say? Now, I know we're talking about Masoretic here. That brings up a lot of questions or whatever, but this is what I'll say about that is if you look in the Masoretic, Ezekiel 18:10 says, he says, should you have, you can bring this, pull up, can you pull up Ezekiel 18:10 really quick?
Yep. I'm going to do it here with my.
Essentially, he's warning of if you have a violent son, and the word there is paritz again, but in the verse itself, it's like it's self-defining the word. So,
18:10.
Yep. Suppose you have a violent son who sheds blood. Right?
Shed blood. There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look at the way that it's written in different translations as well, sometimes it'll say if you have a violent son, comma, a shedder of blood, comma. In a way, it's like building on the definition of what that word paritz is. Yeah. It's a shedder of blood. It's a violent person.
I can do 3. This is, by the way, if you haven't done crossbible.com, bro, you need to check my boys crossbible.com. Okay. It literally gives you.
I saw you using this. I saw you using this with Jacob's podcast. So
who sheds blood, a shedder of blood, that is a robber, right? There we are with robber,
yep,
shedder of blood. Well, that's interesting. Both are in the American Standard Version, giving that New Testament, English translation says they're robbers or thieves. Well, that doesn't just mean they take your money, because that's been the implication all along. Oh, they're just taking your money. They're giving, they're robbing you of your money. I'm sure that's playing a part as well. But it's like, no, dude, they're literally just sacrificing animals, and your point is that's what's going on.
Stealing life. You can be a thief in a way by taking a life. It's not yours to take, right? So so the implications are that Jesus is doing a full frontal resistance against the sacrificial system with these statements. It says in multiple gospels that he's dealing with the cattle dealers. He's freeing the animals. Even, I believe in one or two of the synoptics, it mentions freeing the doves. In John's gospel, it mentions the oxen, the goats or the lambs, the oxen, that he's freeing them. Go ahead.
What about the one example where he's arguing with them about Sabbath, and he's like, will you not go and stave your oxen if they fall into the ditch or something? His point is I'm looking out for life. I'm looking out for animal. That's more important than your special day of not doing anything. This is more important. Then he uses David as taking showbread and stuff to make, all that interesting stuff. But
if you, even those verses, those passages, that's famously where he quotes in that context, and in another context when he's having a meal with sinners and whatnot, and Pharisees and tax collectors or whatever, he says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And in the one about the Sabbath, I believe he says, if you had known this, you would have not condemned the innocent. And the context is like, oh, he's talking about his disciples because they're technically innocent in his eyes. Picking on the Sabbath isn't a big deal. But the deeper concept that one could posit, again, I'm not saying this is like, capital T truth, but let's marry it into this concept that to these sinners, these unclean people that Jesus was eating with, if you want to call them that, or someone who breaks the Sabbath, I believe the Sabbath breaking has up to a punishment of like death in certain cases. Like it's a pretty gnarly rule. The idea is that if Jesus is eating with these people, in order for them to be made clean and to actually have a meal with them, they would have had to commit a sacrifice. Or if you violate the Sabbath, these different violations of the Mosaic law, ultimately the way to make them right are sacrifices. So there could be an argument that if you would have known I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the innocent. Maybe the innocent are even an implication on the animals, because Jeremiah, who he quotes, says your skirts are stained by the blood of the innocent ones. When he's talking to the priest, he says the blood of the innocent ones, that their skirts are stained. Well, the priest's literal skirts aren't stained by the blood of just, the prophets. Yeah.
Right.
So anyhow,
I keep hearing Eastern, like this just has a Pythagorean-ish kind of like ancient Buddhist Eastern like feel to it, bro. That might be rooted all the way back into this ancient Jeremiah stuff. But I'm like, whoa, where did these ideas come from? So
Totally. Well, we mentioned that briefly in our film. One of our voices tie the early Jesus movement to the Pythagorean movement because, right, Josephus mentions them in the same breath, the Essenes and the Pythagoreans, that they have these similar traditions, etc. I think maybe Philo draws that connection as well. I can't remember, but I do know there's books and books on this and scholarship on this potential connection between the Pythagorean movement, which was, somewhere around 500 years earlier before the supposed, movement of the Nazarenes, Jesus, whatever. And very similar concepts. Pythagoras was famously anti-sacrifice. And to your earlier point that you made about the connection between animal killing and human killing, Pythagoras famously has this quote about those who will harm animals will do likewise to their fellow man. That's a famous quote attributed to Pythagoras. I'm not, I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, but anyhow,
some Greeks even thought that, they had a reincarnation concept, and some of them believed these were their family members. And so you do fun in the film. I love that you brought in Hindus and Buddhists, and like, it's so cool that you didn't just stick to Abrahamic faith when you went in here to learn more about this animal issue. And hearing them explain how the Dalai Lama can eat meat, bro, I was blown away. He can eat meat. How can he, according to their, how do you get around the loophole of making that one work? Well, it just gave up the ghost, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't do it. Cut its head off. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's that tenet in Buddhism that you cannot kill a sentient being. You can't harm a sentient being. And that's the thing that I do want to stress to anyone listening, that Christspiracy in that regard, in terms of really investigating the hypocrisy that's involved with a lot of the modern takes of these religions, is, Christspiracy is an equal opportunity offender in that way. We go really for the Buddhists who have this loophole where it says full stop, you cannot harm a sentient being, yet they often will say that they eat, animal flesh when it's served to them because they don't want to offend the host and this and that. But then again, I don't want to give away too much, but we even press, okay, well, what if you're at a buffet and no one's serving you, you get to choose. And then it causes quite the glitch in the thought process for one of the Buddhists we talked to. But to your point about other traditions is, in order to really make sense of this moment of the temple cleanse with Jesus, another big climax of the film, which I think for most people is really the biggest climax, we go to Godmai animal sacrifice, which is the largest temple animal sacrifice present today. It's in Nepal, and it's
crazy.
Yeah, it's Josephus level numbers, 200, 300,000 cattle. Yeah, 200, 300,000 cattle alone, plus goats, chickens, doves, an innumerable amount on the outskirts of the temple all around, which again is like the Temple of Jerusalem. Like people, it was as centralized in the temple as it could be, but there were other animal sacrifices happening outside. I mean, we're just talking about a bloodbath everywhere. So we knew that we had to go see the closest thing that we could see to what it would have been like to really understand. And so in the film, we went to Nepal, to the Godmai Festival, and it only happens every 5 years. And it's millions and millions and millions of pilgrims who descend on this little town in Nepal for this sacrifice. And man, when I talk about just feeling like I was in some Star Wars scene, like the cantina on Tatooine or something, there's smoke everywhere, all these characters, trippy music, people screaming over the loudspeakers, and all of these people just carrying these animals in, and for a whole day. And then at somewhere around 4 or 5 a.m., they were supposed to kill the first animal, but it ended up delaying until 6 because there are big time Nepalese activists on the ground trying to stop it. And they've been making a big dent every year, every 5 years, to try to stop this. So we're following the Supreme Court decision where they're trying to get the military involved to stop the sacrifice. But in the film, we show what ends up happening. And bottom line, you get a visual to at least some degree of what the Temple of Jerusalem actually looked like. It wasn't a bunch of priests in their perfect linen with just angels singing and, Yeah.
Question about that experience before we continue in Bible. And that is, I saw the film For those who haven't, links in the description. That seemed like a pretty dangerous situation you were in. Did you feel a little bit like you were possibly a threat with the people around? I mean, they're a little bit in the frenzied state. And so you never know the loose cannons of people literally ready to watch them gore animals to death. What's one human? I don't know. Did you feel a little bit of that?
I did, until I had to just completely shut it off and like compartmentalize that thought. Kip, my co-director, and I call it justice mode, justice and righteousness, right? We know that on one hand, there's the temptation to just get really sad too, because these animals are just being butchered everywhere around you, and there's just screaming and bellowing and all of this. But we always say we don't have time to get sad. That's not going to help anyone. And we don't have any time to get afraid, because when you get afraid, your critical thinking skills go out the window. And that's when something bad could happen. So we really just, it's like fight or flight mode, honestly, when you get in a situation like that, like, hey, I have to make it through this. And so you're just really alert. And, but yeah, to your point, we're talking millions of people. And then these guys all have massive swords.
That's what I was wondering.
They're not knives. They're full swords.
Dude, I want a sword in my hand just so I can at least try. It's like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like survive.
Yeah. So all we had was our cameras. We put on these vests that say Nazarene media on the back to pose as if we're some foreign media outlet that's coming to cover it, because they do kind of have to be careful with that. Like, you don't want to attack a media person, because that could go really wrong for your country and tourism and stuff, right? So we at least had that protection. But dude, it was nuts. And on these holidays, part of the celebration is they drink bong. You know what bong is? It's like the cannabis beer.
Oh, okay.
So when you look at these guys with the swords, it's part of their tradition to just down that stuff. And when you look, their eyes are just glazed over with this really soulless look, which, to be fair, like you would have to kind of like detach from your soul a little bit, I think, to just brutally hack off the heads of animals everywhere around you. So it was scary in that sense, for sure, but we just had to put our big boy pants on and make it happen. But definitely don't want to be in that situation again if I can help it. But who knows, maybe I'll have to go back in the next one and try to help these guys continue to shut it down. But that said, I want to get back to now. So now we have this thesis that Jesus was standing against the temple sacrifice. Well, how would that even be possible? Most people think, when you've got the Hebrew Bible, which is just full of animal sacrifice and God commanding it, right? So we don't have to get too in the weeds on this, but I do think one of Ross's super chats, or maybe he just texted it to me, he said, hey, read some anti-sacrifice scripture.
Yeah.
I mean, the Old Testament, as much as there is pro-sacrificial position, there is the position against it. Famously, my favorite, again, Jeremiah 7:22, full stop, says, God never commanded your ancestors, commanded them burnt offerings and sacrifices when he brought them out of Egypt, which would be like Passover time, right? You know, the story of that would be the lamb slaughter. And then you've got Amos 5:25, where he's rhetorically asking, did you offer me any sacrifices when you were in the wilderness, with this implied no, to the answer. Yeah. So you have these prophets, and you can pull any of them up if you want, to show that. But yeah, Jeremiah 7:22. Here's a funny one. So can you pull up Jeremiah 7:22 on like Bible Gateway or one of these ones, like where it shows the NIV next to the other translations?
Yeah, I can do it with this one, even if that's cool.
Pull that up, because what's interesting about this is you can see in real modern times the subtle moving of the goalpost, the subtle shift, because the NIV actually adds the word just in that text. God says, I did not just command your fathers concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices, right? But that word isn't in the Hebrew, and therefore it's not translated in like the more accurate translation.
5 or 7?
Jeremiah 7:22.
Got it. Okay. Can you see my screen? Am I sharing?
I can. Yeah, I can see it, but I got to pull it over to my other screen because it's really small here.
Yeah, it says, for when I brought your this is NIV, when I brought your ancestors out of Egypt and spoke to them, I did not just give them commands about burnt offerings and sacrifices. ASV says, that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings nor commanded them in that day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So he's talking about sacrifices. And then Berean says, for when I brought your fathers out of the land of Egypt, I did not merely command them about burnt offerings and sacrifices. So it just depends on the version.
Yeah. But like pull up, say, the NRSV or the NASB or some, these more like literal translations. Can you pull up one of those?
So you got NASB. Yeah, let's do that.
See what that one says. It's been a while since I've looked at all the different
I
variations.
did not speak to your fathers or command them on that day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices.
So see, the NASB is known for being a more literal translation to the point where it's hard to read sometimes.
Yeah.
And that right there, look at the shift. Look at the shift between the NASB to the NIV, which is like
I didn't just give them commands about burnt offerings.
It completely changes the meaning
them at all. Like one sounds like there was no command for burnt offerings. The other one sounds like I didn't just give them burnt offering commandments. I gave them more, What
a subtle shift, right? And so that, I think, an important argument is to know that even without getting into interpolation, and even with Ross says, here we go, let's go. Even without getting into interpolations or, documentary hypothesis and all of that, at face value, you can look all throughout the text. Again, we mentioned Hosea 6:6, which Jesus quotes, I desire mercy. Right. Ross is it velocifat? Hesed is desire. Hesed is desire. But not sacrifices.
Desire loyalty rather than sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings.
Right.
That's an interesting shift in these prophets. You know what I mean?
Right. And so the reason why I wanted to point out the NIV's subtle shift there is that's catering to this modern idea that God in these scriptures actually does want sacrifice. He just wants it with a pure heart, and he wants you to be in the right place, and he wants you to not do it to other gods, only do it to him. However, when you read the text at face value, it's very clearly, I did not command this. And in Hosea 6:6, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, knowledge of God or obedience rather than burnt offerings. And an example that I like to use, which Aaron and some of the guys that I talked about in that chat, I have some Nazarene bros that we all discuss this with. We often say there's a great analogy for that of, Derek, imagine you're sitting with your wife at dinner and the waiter comes up. What do you have to eat? And your wife whispers in your ear, hey, tonight I really want salad, not pasta. And you go, okay. And you turn to the waiter and you go, we'll have salad and pasta. Right. And she's like, what do you mean? I said salad, not pasta. I want to eat lighter tonight. I want something light rather than something heavy like pasta. And then you go, okay, cool. Yeah, go ahead and bring us the salad first, but then we'll have the pasta after. Your wife would be like, and then Hosea goes on to say this, like, listen to me, obey my voice. God says, like, hey, honey, you're not listening. I don't want that. I want this. And then, then people would say, well, with that analogy, maybe your wife doesn't want it that day, but she wants it other days. But no, does God ever change? Right? That the idea is that God is unchanging, right? So it seems to be a very clear text that often with exegesis and all these layers, we try to add this idea that God wanted it. So again, Isaiah talks about this. He says, your hands are full of blood. You can pull up something like Isaiah chapter 1, right around verse 11, where Isaiah is just ranting against all the bloodshed and the fat of the bulls. That would be a good one to pull up.
Multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. I have had enough. Look at the NASB again. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fattened calf. I take no pleasure in the blood of bulls, lambs, or goats. So that's what's funny for me, like my perspective is not to find the authentic version, right? For me, I like to find the different voices and what they meant originally. But even if earlier religion had these things, there seems to be a reformation taking place, period. Whether or not there was an earlier form where humans were doing this in the name of this God, or if they were taking breaks. It's almost like aniconism, like the not having an image of a God. There were some times that certain religious systems were against images and other times they were for it. And you'll see there's even debate amongst them about whether or not that's allowed or not in certain areas. But in this case, I've heard before from scholars exactly what you're saying. No. He's not against sacrifices. They're against the people making them, because the people making them aren't feeding the poor. The people making them aren't treating the widows kindly. The people making them aren't, being nice, and they're being evil and they're violent, mean people. So if they were just doing all those things that were good things, then their sacrifices would be acceptable, tolerable, and honorable to this deity, but they're not. So it has nothing to do with sacrifice. Whereas you're actually saying, no. What we're seeing here is blood sacrifice of animals is a no-go. It's not cool. And it's a problem.
Right. And honestly, we could take the whole rest of the podcast. There's so many verses and attestation for this position, for this blue thread, if you will, which we talked about in the first podcast. Yeah. Dr. James Tabor likes to call this the blue thread of righteousness, peace, and nonviolence in the text that's competing in a kind of dual vocal voice against the violence, right? But to anyone listening, some good recommendations. Another one, I forgot to mention my buddy Brad Bink, who goes by David Ha Notsari on YouTube, and he's got extensive videos that you can watch, like audiobooks, where he reads these texts out back to back, and it's just overwhelming. Ross Nichols talks about it as well. One of the best and first anti-sacrificial prophet pods or videos I ever watched in depth was one of Ross's, where it's called Not the Ideal. And, it's this idea that it's clearly not God's ideal to be slaughtering and slaying innocent creatures. Bottom line, if you just look at the greatest context of the biblical narrative, whether you're talking Hebrew Bible or the full canonical Christian Bible, what do I mean by saying that is often people that will try to, fight against this position that I'm positing, they'll say, oh, well, you're just cherry picking scripture out of context to try to support this position.
Right.
Okay. Well, cherry picking implies taking something out of context, right? Well, let's take into account the greatest context we can then, starting in the very beginning in the creation narrative in Genesis 1:29, really 1:26 through 30, you've got dominion that God gives over the birds and the fish and the beasts and everything. And right after it in Genesis 1:29, man's given a plant-based diet strictly.
Right.
So clearly slaughter has nothing to do with that dominion. He even goes on to say in the narrative in 1:30 that animals aren't even preying on each other. And then you see this reflection in the kingdom of heaven, which is the prophetic ending of the story, the eschatology, right? Where the wolf will lay with the lamb, the lion will eat straw like the ox again, and they shall not hurt nor destroy. That's Isaiah 11. And even Revelation, which is the literal end of the canonical Christian Bible, right? Revelation 21:4 says they'll wipe every tear from their eye. There'll be no more death, no more tears, right? Uh-oh, did I lose you again? Oh, I thought you were frozen.
Nope. I'm doing something while you do that. I was actually going to bring up, there's a book, I think Herman Gunkel writes, talking about the end actually reflects the beginning, apocalyptic wise. So in these eschatological texts that we find, like the New Testament, they're going back to the beginning. Yes. This is just how it works. When they think the end is near, they always look to the beginning. And you see this over and over. 2 Peter, even though it's written later, gives the implication like, all right, you remember the flood destroyed the earth the first time? Well, now it's going to be by fire. So they're constantly recollecting back to the beginning. And you've highlighted some of these aspects of violence. Yeah. Animals didn't eat each other. Humans weren't eating animals. Seemed to be the utopian idea, or the the heavenly kind of vision that the author seems to have is no more pain, no more suffering, no more, that's the hope.
Right. And Yeshua, Jesus, even if we take the canonical Greek Gospels, this idea is preserved of what's in the beginning is the ideal, right? When he's asked about divorce, remember he says, well, it was not so from the beginning, but because of your hardness of heart, it's almost this concession, right? And what I would posit is that similarly for this animal sacrifice, which I think goes even on to animal consumption, full stop, consuming flesh, was a major rejected, unlawful thing for the messianic, Nazarene, Ebionite movement at the time, which I believe Jesus was a part of. And I can see it, even though the Greek Gospels kind of spin out on this a little bit because they're written much later. And I think that there was maybe an agenda behind removing some of this idea. But even in the canonical Greek text, you see these ideas with Jesus saying that. Also, one of my favorite verses in the Greek New Testament is John 10:10 and 11, where he says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come to bring life abundantly. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep, right? Are you pulling it up?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. John 10:10 through 11.
Mm-hmm.
But what we can look at, I don't know if you can do this on the Cross Bible app here, but that word kill in Greek, when Jesus says in 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, is the Greek thuo. I believe it's like thyse or something. There's a different plurality to it, or the context shifts the way the word reads in the sentence, but the root is thuo. And it's the word for ritual animal slaughter in Greek. I can
get a Greek New Testament here, but I can't read Greek.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, if I had a transliteration, I could go to either way. I hear what you're saying. Should I pull that up?
Yeah. You could pull it up on Bible Hub, maybe, I think is one. Like if you Google John 10:10 Greek, it'll bring up Bible Hub as like the top result there, I'm pretty sure.
Let's do John 10 interlinear. And then let's go to verse 10. Is this it? Yeah.
Steal, kill.
There we go. The thief not comes, if not, that he might steal and kill.
So yeah, thyse right over there under kill.
Right here. Yep.
And if you can click on it.
Okay.
I think, right?
Yeah.
See what that pulls up. The other iterations. I'm pretty sure there's a way with the interlinear, you can see the other uses of it. But it's, again, anyone just look at this so we don't get too off track. Go to Bible Hub, click on all the occurrences of this word, and you'll see it's always referencing animal sacrifice. So Jesus is literally condemning, saying that the thief comes to steal, kill, ritual animal slaughter, and destroy. Hey, here's that destroy word again. Like, they shall not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain. Yet this time it's the Greek destroy. It's not the Hebrew, but still it's that idea that the Greek word there is needless, senseless loss of life. So Jesus is talking about ritual animal slaughter in these terms, needless, senseless loss of life. Then he follows it with, I've come to bring life abundantly. And this really gets into this two ways philosophy, which my brother Chris Sartain speaks a lot about. The Ebionite Church of Christian Mysticism on YouTube. But Dr. Tabor talks a lot about this. There's this two ways philosophy within this early Hebrew Christian movement that shows that it's the way of life and the way of death is the real simple terms of how this philosophy works. And so he's kind of presenting this two ways philosophy. And then he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. Now in Christian tradition, this is a verse that's thrown out talking about the lost flock of Israel, or us as the sheep wandering lost, and he comes and brings us in. Cool. Perfectly fine metaphor, likely means it in that context. Could he also be referring to the literal sheep being sent into the temple in droves of thousands to maybe even millions, as the Talmud says, to be richly, brutally slaughtered, just like John 10:10, the earlier verse, is being condemned? So is the good shepherd the one who lays his life down for the sheep? So that's the idea, is that Jesus in this temple cleanse, what we discuss in the film, is this act is him literally putting his life on the line to condemn and stop all of the life taking of all these animals, right? So
if I may, this is interesting. I've got a book over here. Actually I have it up here. Bear with me one second. This is, if I can reach it. All right. Nobody's dead. All right. So this book, you can see the author.
I can't see it.
You can't?
Arthur Droge.
Yep. And
yeah. Oh, James Tabor. Yeah. Okay.
Title:
Nice.
A Noble Death, Suicide and Martyrdom Among Christians and Jews in Antiquity. And holy smokes, says the right to die. Oh, let me pull you back up here. Sorry. The
No
right
worries.
to die with dignity has emerged as a crucial issue in the 1990s. That's when he's publishing this, right? As reports of family or doctor-assisted suicides increase, the issue of voluntary death is occupying an increasingly prominent place in our national consciousness. From theologians, medical ethicists, and talk show hosts to people facing the issue in their own lives, all are participants in the debate, each seeking to influence and control the discourse on suicide and euthanasia. Now, this path-breaking study provides a stunning reappraisal of the early history of this controversial human freedom. A Noble Death challenges the often unquestioning attitudes we have towards suicide and traces of evolution. What he goes into is the martyrdoms that we see within the Maccabees, these motifs of them laying down their lives intentionally for the noble cause. But what you made me think of was, again, getting into, is this really reflecting earlier pre-70 stuff, or is this again reflecting a post-70 backwards thinking to rationalize the explanation for why Jesus died? And is this author saying, his death wasn't in vain? And in fact, look over at the temple. The sacrifices have ceased.
Right.
He was it. So
Right.
Is this a post hoc rationalization by an author written later saying, you know what, he was the once for all. It's done. Look, it's the Jerusalem's temple's gone, dude. Like there's nothing there. So whether you think he was really running on the ground to do this, taking the approach of like legitimate, he's willing to lay his life down in you can almost say a death by cop kind of thing where but his intentions are good. Or you could take it as a post hoc rationalization for why the temple has completely ceased its sacrifices as a justified means of, look at the sins. Now we're explaining why it happened. It's almost like today, if a Christian was to explain why 9/11 took place, or, they might try to explain, well, the sin of such and such or whatever. You kind of wonder if the author is reflecting that. And I'm just giving an alternative explanation. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's quite the possibility. And, I think there's an argument that a lot, say Stephen Boyce even used in our debate, where these Ebionites and these kind of, for lack of better words, vegetarian, anti-sacrifice, ascetic groups were later in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century taking it there, right? Maybe they're mixing with Platonic schools or whatever. Right. However, my thing that brings it back in time for me, and this is where I'm really excited to talk to you, because I know that you're into the sources and you have a healthy skepticism, right? Is one of the biggest pieces that I can't get around it, with that later idea is we've got Pliny the Younger. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Pliny the Elder. I'm sorry. In his Natural History, which was written in 50 to 60 AD or something. That's what most people believe because of his
Elder?
death
I
date.
thought it was later.
Yeah, look it up.
Yeah,
he would have
Elder,
died.
Worked with Vespasian, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Natural History.
You can look up Pliny's Natural History. When would it have been written?
Okay.
And while you're pulling that up, though, what I'll say is, I believe scholars are pretty certain that Pliny, he was doing he was laying the land out in the geography of the Middle East, and he was using census data and materials from 30 BC. I forget the materials he was pulling from, but it's 30 BC or maybe even earlier than 30 BC is he's pulling this data. And so check it out. In Natural History
So he wrote it in 77, but that doesn't mean what he's talking about isn't from sources that are earlier, for all we know.
Right.
Like,
exactly. And you know what? I meant to send you this document so you could pull it up so we could go through this. Let me see really quickly here if I can do it fast. I'll text you this document so we can get the exact sourcing here. Yeah, let's see.
Okay. By the way, thank you for all the super chats. Ross K. Nichols, you're a stud. Thank you. The motherfucking Wendyberg for being a member and happy 1 month subversary. Thank you for that. We got other super chats. Do we want to get these supers at the end? Some of these, I think questions need to, we'll have fun and then we'll hit the questions at the end. How's that sound? I think that sounds a better idea so we don't distract from the topic.
Okay, I just sent you a document that we can kind of go through here because I think this is really important for this part of the conversation. I'm going to move. Look on the screen here with you.
I think this is it. You see it? Or am I? Oh, wrong one. That was me looking up on.
That's your ChatGPT. Your Pliny.
Yeah. So that was red heifer. Okay. Do I not?
I called the document the One Holy Catholic Apostolic Church.
Got it. You got to make someone happy, right?
Yeah.
How come it's not letting me? Okay, well, I guess I'll just share my whole screen. It's being weird. It's not even popping up for me to do that. So I'll just do entire screen, I guess. You guys see a mess. Don't blame me if my house looks dirty with everything there. Okay. I'm just going to do this, dude.
Cool. Yeah. There we go. Pliny the Elder. The source. Okay. We can even just start from the beginning. We can get to the Pliny stuff. So this is really important. So remember I was talking about Isaiah 11 as this prophetic kingdom of heaven. Wolf will lay with the lamb. Lion will eat straw like the ox. They shall not hurt nor destroy on my holy mountain. The beginning of that text, if you remember, in Isaiah 1 is one of the greatest, messianic prophecies. It says from the stump of Jesse, the root, the shoot or the branch shall come. And this word branch is netzer, the Hebrew netzer. And I'm sure you're familiar. Matthew has the strange prophecy. He shall be called the Nazarene, right? That's perplexed many for so long. There's no prophecy about Jesus being called, the Messiah being a Nazarene. Well, the kind of harmonization or understanding of that, Tabor would posit this, I'm pretty sure, and many have, that it comes, that the word Nazarene comes from this idea of the netzer. But here's the interesting thing, is also in that same text, it has the avanim for the poor. The poor, he shall judge the poor as righteous, I believe it says something like that.
Right.
But avanim, ebionim, these are different words for the word poor. So even this idea of the ebionim of the poor even makes its way into this kind of Isaiah text as well. But so the point that we make in the film is that the Nazarene is not someone from Nazareth, because we have this idea from the church fathers and the heresiologies and everything, that there's this Nazarene sect that are kind of the first Christians. They even admit they're the first Christians, but they're heretics because they've stayed with the law. They have all these reasons why they only believe Jesus is the Messiah. Even some of them believe Son of God, but they don't raise him to this full triune Godhead thing. They keep him as maybe an adopted divine figure, the adoptionist kind of idea. But bottom line is, there's been this argument, and I'm sure you've come across it with Renee Psalm. I think Richard Carrier maybe talks about this, but this idea that there's no Nazareth, there's no mention of a town named Nazareth in any historical record, 200 years after Jesus in the religious texts, and 400 years in the secular texts, that this name is a really, really late name for this town. Now we have obviously archaeological record for a hamlet near the place where people have believed Nazareth was. And now there's a city Nazareth in Israel, right? But It's not like the pottery that was found has the word Nazareth on it, right? And you've got Josephus, who is literally documenting all of these. I don't know if it says it in this document.
I think your documentary said like 205 towns or something.
205 towns, and he's right there, I think, documenting in Sepphoris or something. He's close by, and he doesn't mention Nazareth.
Dude,
So,
I went to Sepphoris. I was there. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
It's like, according to modern Nazareth, you can see it. It's right. It's in visual, like right down the road.
Right. So there's this question of, okay, well, all through the Gospels, the Greek Gospels, you've got the term Jesus the Nazarene and Jesus the Nazarene. You see those two spellings there. And both of them, but especially the later one, Nazarene, complicate deriving that name from the word Nazareth with the way the vowels work. We don't have to get into all the specifics, but anyone can look this up. I believe it's in the first paragraph on Wikipedia of Nazarene, the title. It explains this. It's funny though. I'll put my tinfoil hat on for a second. Every couple of years I go to Wikipedia and that section's removed from the Nazarene title, and I have to go in and refute it and click a button in the deeper Wikipedia to try to pull it back. Someone keeps trying to delete that part. But it'll give you the source material. It's in the Encyclopedia Biblica. There's many places that talk about this idea that these two terms, Nazarene and Nazarene, are more sectarian titles than they are like, Derek the Floridian, right? No,
Right.
it's Derek the, and then a religious title. It's Jesus the Nazarene. And in John, he's King of the Jews, Jesus the Nazarene. It says in John that sectarian title is there. Even Paul, right? Paul is accused of being a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So most people will say, well, it's a later sect. They're called that because Jesus was from Nazareth and they're following the Nazarene, right?
Right.
But here's where I get to the Pliny piece. So now that we've covered that, we full circle back to Pliny. In natural history, for some reason, I thought it had the page number. Maybe we can put that you can Google it really quick, but it's in his natural history. I believe it's like book
the Tetrarchy of Nazarene.
Yes. He refers to the Tetrarchy of the Nazarene. Exactly.
Okay. So I'll have to close this though. If everybody can see this, right? First of all, we're talking, what is this? Using data from 30 BCE, post 50 AD. So refers to the Tetrarchy of the Nazarene. Okay. So I need to Google this. Let's stop sharing. We'll come back up on screen. I will look this up right now. Actually, I'll use ChatGPT and then I'll open up an actual source to find out what the direct source is, because you didn't put the source there either, right?
Yeah, I don't know why that's not there, but I could probably find it quickly too. I believe it's like
in Nazarene.
Nazerini, Tetrarchy of the Nazarene. But while you're pulling that up, you'll see that Pliny puts this geographical location of this very clearly sectarian title or title of a people. He's writing in Latin, and he puts them in the area of Col Syria. I forget, there's a river that he mentions, but it's basically right there in middle to lower Syria, Damascus area, is this Tetrarchy of the Nazarene. Okay. Still nothing here. I can look on my side and just I should have had this ready for you here. I'll pull up a ChatGPT.
I use ChatGPT to get like an idea, but then you really have to fact check because they do not get quotes right.
Oh yeah. I could pull up the literal natural history.
Yeah. Let's see. Is it book 5, chapter 23? I guess Nazarene. Let's see. Pliny the Elder.
I should have had a slideshow or something for this part. I didn't really think about it. Let's see.
Good.
Yeah, book 5. Let's see.
Book 5,
19. Book 5, 19, I think it is.
Yeah. Okay. So let me share screen now. I'm on, let's see. Pliny the Elder, Natural History. We are on Perseus Tufts, always a great go-to. Here we are.
I believe it's at the top.
Right? Pliny Natural 5 point.
Oh yeah. So chapter 19.
Yeah. Oh, is this not it? It's chapter 5, I think. Book 5.
No, go to 19. It's right next to you, right there. See chapter 19, the remaining parts of Syria.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Boom. Exactly.
Let's do its magic here. And then what verse? 19.
Right there at the top. I just saw it. Very, very top. Yep.
Oh, Nazarene, Tetrarchy of the Nazarene. Okay.
Exactly. So by the river of Marsyas, Amapia. So this is interior Syria, lower middle interior Syria, Damascus area. Okay. Now we've got Julius Africanus, I believe, being reported by Eusebius, stating that the Nazarene, that Nazara, not Nazareth, Nazara is next to Kochaba. And Nazara is actually an alternate spelling in the Greek New Testament for Nazareth. Like if you look behind the English transliteration of Nazareth, I believe it's in John, multiple places throughout the Greek New Testament, the spelling isn't Nazareth or whatever, it's Nazara. And interestingly, this is how Marcion has it. Marcion has it Nazara, right? Well, Kochaba, Julius Africanus, puts Nazara by Kochaba, and Kochaba is Transjordan. So there's this idea of the Galilee of the Gentiles, like Judas the Galilean, right? He's from the other side of Galilee. So we always think of Jesus as a Galilean or from, because Nazareth is there. But the idea is that the Nazarenes, this sect going all the way back with Pliny, were a people that were stationed out in this Transjordan to Lower Syria area out in what probably was kind of a little bit of wilderness or no man's land. There were some cities, the Decapolis and everything later, but what's interesting is the church fathers say that the Nazarenes and the Ebionim, the Ebionites, who followed James the Just, it looks like, a lot of scholars talk about this, they fled to Pella, right, after the destruction of the temple, Transjordan, and then they end up settling into the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century in the Decapolis, this same area. So when you pair those secular references of Pliny, Africanus, and then you get our favorite yappy, grumpy Epiphanius.
With his medicine, Panarion means like his medicine. He's going to fix heretics is the point.
Let's pull up. Can you pull up the Panarion real quick?
Yeah. I think I have the book somewhere.
Oh, I have it right here too as well.
I have there's several volumes though. It's massive.
Yeah, it's volume 1.
I'll Google it.
Yeah, it's Panarion. It's just the first volume. When he's going through the Jewish sects and the Gnostics and the heretics.
You remember what chapter?
Let me see. Yeah, it's chapter 29.
29? Okay, Nazarene. Okay. Right here. Looks like
book 1
right, Nazarenes too. Hold on, let me
we can actually, I think when you pull it up online, it'll Oh yeah, there you go. That was quick. Wait, is that your
This is not the book version that I have, but I just Googled this.
Okay, interesting.
I'll add the link.
Oh, wait. But before we get here, so this is what I want to get to. So here's the thing about Epiphanius, is he's got the Nazarenes with the Z, and then he's the Z, and he's got the Nazarenes with the S, the Sigma. And he distinguishes them as two different groups. And so I wanted to bring up the S, the ones with the S, but here's even, I'm sure you've seen this before. This is the go-to Panarion, translated by Frank Williams. And he's got commentary in this book on these guys.
I think I have that book, dude. We got to pull it up because you're probably going to tap into something here, right? With this commentary, I imagine.
Yeah. So if you just Google Panarion book 1, it'll pull up. I think it looks like a Greek link or something, but it'll pull up the PDF, and that way we can word search really quick.
Epiphanius Panarion book 1.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's in PDF. Is it Gnosis Study?
That one, Gnosis Study. Yeah, pull that one up.
Okay. Of course it would be Gnosis. Here we go.
Okay. So can you keyword Nazarene with an S? N-A-S. N-A-S-A-R-A-E-A-N. There it is. That one.
A-R-A-E-A-N-S. Nazarenes, right? Or just Nazarene. Okay.
I would just keep, So now go through the instances. So check this one out really quick. So this is where he specifies, this is a good, he's giving commentary.
Let me zoom in a little, people. Sorry.
No worries.
Go ahead.
So what I love about this is the translator, Frank Williams, is giving his take before we get into the book, where he's saying, like, look, he's pulling in other people's voices and this and this. Sometimes it's hard to know what's actually Epiphanius' voice, but I love this commentary because he's saying we can be sure that we're hearing Epiphanius' voice when he's talking about the Nazarenes, because he's going really hard. He's saying he's going really hard against them about their resistance to flesh eating. He's like, this is definitely Epiphanius, because he's going really, really in. And the hilarious thing is most of the examples that he gives are the same things that you hear today when you bring this up. It's like Epiphanius, like, well, what about Abraham with the ram? And Peter's had his vision said, kill and eat, and this and that, right?
We actually have a good super chat that actually says, well, what about Abel, his acceptable sacrificial lamb? Or he was accepted because of his. This is good. This is good. Okay.
It's the same arguments for millennia. So,
by the way, I'm going to give you praise for asking the question later, super chatters. I promise. I don't want to butt in. My friend here's got a good, interesting thing we're diving into.
Yeah. We'll, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to hit what we're on right now and give you the full thing through just a quick thing on the Hebrew Matthew, and then we can be done. I think this will be a cool way
to need to do a follow-up. There's some cool stuff.
Oh yeah, because there's so many more materials we can get into on this, but essentially, okay, so go to the next instance of the word. Want
me to go again?
Yep. Okay, so here we see, I love this instance. This is Epiphanius in his preface to what he's going to be diving into. And he's showing you here that the Nazarenes are a sect of Judaism, or they're an offshoot of what at that time was considered now Judaism. At the time, they probably didn't use that word, right? But in hindsight, he's saying we're going to look through the different sects of quote unquote Judaism, and he's putting Nazarenes as one of them. Okay, so keep going from there. More. And I'll say on that point, right? What do you hear a lot of people talk about that are in the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of that? There's the idea is that Jesus is always in the canonical text rebuking the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Therefore, it may be likely that he was of the Essene sect, which is a big title, right? But like, if he's not one of these, a lot of his tenets and things that he preaches about fall in line with a lot of these texts that you find at in the Dead Sea Scroll community, etc. That maybe there's this idea that he is, or John the Baptist was, and he's developing on that tradition. There's a lot of scholarly kind of conversation around that. But what we have here is we have Epiphanius showing that the Nazarenes were a known sect of Judaism outside of that term, just that blanket Essene term, right?
Yeah, with all the Scythians and all sorts of stuff.
Right. Okay, so go to the next instance here.
Nazarenes meaning rebels.
Yeah, so he's trying to understand where the word comes from. He's eating
any meat.
Yeah, he thinks it comes from rebels. Again, we'll see. So the NASR, the transliteration of that, is actually closer to the Netzer idea in Isaiah 11. So the branch people, sometimes it gets the idea of the guardians or the watchers or the keepers of the law, right? Now, go to the next instance.
Well, the next one I think is right here.
Okay. So this is the actual heresiology against them, the writing. So I'll briefly just go through it. This sect I'll overtake. They're Himera Baptist, sect after the Himera Baptist, the sect of the Nazarenes, Jews by nationality, but from Gileaditis, Bashantis, and the Transjordan. Right there, he is saying that they're this Transjordan community. I have been told, but descendants of Israel himself. So they believe they are literal descendants of Israel. Okay. And he goes on to just show how they're very similar to the standard Jewish or Judaic thought of the time, but they don't inoculate fate or astrology. Now go to the next page. But here's the big one. They, I'm going to read it in normal English rather than his. It is actually they recognize as fathers the persons of the Pentateuch from Adam to Moses, who are illustrious in their excellence. Adam, Seth, Enoch. So he's naming all these patriarchs, right? However, they didn't accept the Pentateuch itself. They acknowledged Moses and believed that he had received legislation, not this legislation, though, they said, but some other. And so they were Jews that kept all the Jewish observances, but they would not offer sacrifice or eat flesh. That's the actual word flesh there I believe he's writing in Greek. In their eyes, it was unlawful to eat meat or make sacrifices with it. They claim that these books are forgeries and that none of these customs were instituted by the fathers. This was the difference between the Nazarenes and the others, and their refutation is to be seen not in one place, but in many. And then he goes on, Abraham and the ram and all that, right?
Right.
So here we have what we were talking about earlier, this group that if you take Pliny in this, potentially earlier, he goes on in another book of this same, or another chapter of the same Panarion, where he says the Nazarenes were before Christ. You can even, if you want to keyword search it, it'll pull it up probably the next iteration or two. Keep going. Nazarenes who I mentioned earlier, coming Christ.
Ebionites after Christ, as well as with the Nazarenes who came later, and 4 sects that have been made use of him because they were bewitched.
Well, really quickly, and I would pull up one of the translator Frank Williams commentaries on this, but we'll skip it. But basically, there's a really funny commentary that he gives on how Epiphanius just doesn't even know what he's talking about when it comes to the origins or dating of these sects. Like, he's really confused. And he gives this example. He says, the Ebionites, as well as the Nazarenes who came later, and actually, I'm referring to a different passage, but basically,
that's an NAZ Nazarene.
Yeah. So he all throughout the text, he's like, I think this one comes later, but I don't know. It might have been this one, or maybe it was, he does all of that. And the bottom line is more than likely they're the same group. Maybe there's a subtle difference between them, but he's trying to really obfuscate these groups as two different things, when the S to the Z is a natural shift of linguistic, a linguistic shift over time from, say, like a Semitic language like Aramaic to a Greek language. We see it in the word Asia. Like, Asia went in Greek from first being spelled with a sigma to then later being spelled with a zeta. Like, that shift happens a lot. So they're probably just the same group pronounced differently. So go to the next iteration really quickly. Nazarenes, keep one more. One more somewhere.
It might be somewhere.
Here it is. This is it.
Is this?
The sect of Nazarenes was before Christ.
Yeah, the sect of the Nazarenes was before Christ and did not know Christ.
Yeah, and see, here is.
How would he know this?
Yeah, I know. And how would he know it? And it's clearly a heresiology move to, like, oh, they didn't know Christ, the Christ that we're preaching, the orthodoxy, right? That's what he means. In other places, so me and Neil from Gnostic Informant have found traditions that we think are rooted in commonality with Dionysus, the water and the wine stuff that we see. And what's funny is he'll like quote and he'll go, "Those filthy heathens borrowed from us," and I'm like quoting Pliny the Elder, the very same source you quoted, to point out this is before Christianity, what we would call Christianity, is even like writing literature. And this guy, by the way, for those who don't know who Pliny is, this guy is a gangster. I mean, he is up there with Vespasian. He is an elite. He is educated, high up here elite. And to pretend that Pliny the Elder borrowed from, a small group of Christianity in the 70s in terms of his knowledge of trying to craft a myth, when we have a tradition of Dionysus turning water into wine or having wine miracles celebrated in different areas of the known world. I guess what I'm getting at is he, in this 4th, 5th century text that he's trying to write against heretics, literally just flips and acts like, no, they took from us. The point I'm getting at is to make your point. He would not know if he is doing anything. It's the typical shtick that counter anti-heresiologist would do. And that is, oh, they just stole from us. Nope. They just distorted what we had original. We had the original true version and they manipulated it and twisted it. It's like modern apologetics in a way. Exactly. And so we don't have to, dude, we could do a whole podcast just on this book because there is so much gold. when he talks about the Nazarenes, and then he goes on to talk about the Ebionites, who I mentioned are again one and the same with the Nazarenes. And this is where I kind of want to transition, because there's so much we could say about this. But the point is that it says that, or Epiphanius says that they believe Moses received a legislation, but not this one, some other. And that the difference was that there was a forgery around animal sacrifice. That's basically what he's saying. And what's fascinating is our good friend, Ross Nichols, that we keep bringing up on the chat.
He's our good friend. You better forgive me. So go ahead.
Holy and righteous friend. He's a good dude.
Yes. Good guy.
So he has his work on the Moses scroll, which again is a whole other podcast. But just the high level cliff notes is that he went into a forgery of the Shapira scroll, supposed forgery, and he, alongside, Dershowitz, Edan Dershowitz is a biblical scholar who looked into this as well, and it's becoming more and more evident that this is potentially not a forged document, and it's a Deuteronomic text, meaning Mosaic law. And the interesting thing about this scripture, which more than likely at this point looks like it's leaning in the direction of it's not a forgery, it's real. I mean, Dr. Tabor did a whole writing on Biblical Archaeology Review defending that potential position. And again, without getting lost in the sauce on that story, because it's an epic story. It's got Freemasonry involved and death by suicide and all this stuff.
A movie about this.
Yeah. That's what Ross and I are discussing. So, but the point there is that this document that is potentially a very, very old Deuteronomic text has no animal sacrifice. The whole Deuteronomy, what is it, 11 or 12 to 27, that priestly code is just not there.
Right.
So the idea is, whether it's a Reformation movement or a restoration movement, like you said, these Nazarenes seem to fit this bill of this Transjordan sect, maybe somehow related to this Reuben, Gad, half Manasseh idea, where they didn't come over into the land. They built a altar not for sacrifice, as I believe it says in Joshua or Samuel. And that this tradition is like, hey, we're not doing the temple thing and the sacrifices and all of that. And it might be way, way earlier than we ever knew. And they had their own Deuteronomic Mosaic law texts, as Epiphanius says, not this one that we have, not the Torah we have, but some other, without these traditions. And maybe Jesus, the Nazarene, as he's condemned as, is learning from this way, from this cultural position, and he's coming in. Whereas John the Baptist, this figure, is maybe taking a still ascetic approach, telling everyone to come out of the city, be baptized, giving an alternative for forgiveness of sin through baptism. Instead of blood, we've got water.
Right.
Jesus is like, cool, that's great. But now I always like to use Star Wars as the analogy. It's like Jesus is now Luke Skywalker. He's come from Tatooine, Galilee of the Gentiles, Transjordan, no man's land, but he's like, hey, we got to take it to the Death Star. And they get the Rebel Alliance together, right, and they go to the temple and they throw down. And so after that, you've got all of these, I mean, just the who's who of patristics write about these two groups, obviously as heretics, but they mention that they have a Hebrew or Aramaic written with Hebrew letters gospel attributed to Matthew earlier than the Greek gospel. And in that gospel, it says that Jesus specifically says, I have come to abolish sacrifices. If you do not cease from sacrificing, wrath will not cease from you. And I have no desire to eat the flesh of this lamb with you. So I don't know if you can pull up really quick, just one last source. It's my document that I sent you. If you're able to pull that one up really quick.
Oh, the same one?
Yeah. I just want to show you these two attestations from Jerome, which I think are a really powerful one to end on. And remember, while you're pulling that up, we've got Dr. Robert Eisenman. He goes to the extreme with this theory. Tabor is a little bit more in the center with it, et cetera. Michael Wise, et cetera. But this idea that James the Just, the brother of Jesus, is actually the first appointed leader of this movement. It's not necessarily Peter and definitely not Paul. and that this kind of Pauline Christianity is a later development.
Sources were, bro. I didn't see them on the right. All your stuff is here on the right.
Oh, okay. There
But
we go.
yeah, you've got tons of scholars, by the way, here listed.
Yeah.
You see the screen?
I can see your screen. Yeah. So Jerome should be in there. So scroll down. One of the same and rejected. So there's, yep. But I actually have the commentary on Matthew. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, look. In the gospel, which the Nazarenes and Ebionites used. Now, here's what's really interesting. Jerome's writing in Latin. Remember Latin Vulgate? Mm-hmm. This is the guy that kind of made the popular common every man's Bible, right? So he's writing here, that word Nazarenes in our English is actually Nazarene, the same spelling of Pliny the Elder that we looked at earlier. Same exact spelling. So the gospel which the Nazarenes and Ebionites use, which I have lately translated into Greek from the Hebrew tongue, and which is called by most people the authentic gospel of Matthew. Okay. So in this one source, we have him conflating the Nazarenes and Ebionites pretty much as the same group. He says it in another attestation. I don't know. It might be just below that one.
I could scroll down here.
Maybe. No, but
juicy stuff here.
Oh yeah. So scroll back up just to, oh, there he is.
Is it?
Here's another one. Jerome says, in the gospel according to the Hebrews, which is indeed in the Chaldean and Syriac speech, but is written in Hebrew letters, which the Nazareans use to this day, called according to the apostles, or as most term it, according to Matthew, which is also to be seen in the library of Caesarea. So
something was there.
Yeah, something was there. And so the point is that I'm trying to get at is every way I try to slice it, it seems like there is some authentic early movement, pre-orthodoxy, that has this earlier gospel, which has a central anti-sacrificial theme, just like the prophets seem to do throughout the prophets, and that the later orthodoxy had to, for who knows what reason, to accommodate the Greco-Roman world, all the meat-eating, flesh-eating, whatever. Conversations about Marcion kind of come involved with this. There's so many theories that I have. I won't get into it, but that's why I enjoyed hearing you and Jacob riff the other day with just his different kind of theories on the synoptic problem and everything. But somehow this tradition gets morphed into what we have today, which is more of a Pollyanity than a Christianity, if you will. But we have this, I think it was 13 bishops after James the Just before the flight to Pella, or maybe even after the flight to Pella until the first bishop. But there's this lineage that James the Just is appointed. Thomas talks about James, there's this other tradition that these are the real quote unquote Christians, if you will.
Right.
And hey, you mentioned when you were talking about Pliny earlier.
Yeah.
Were you talking about his letter to Trajan a second ago? Is that
what that's actually Pliny the Younger.
Right.
And the elder was the one who specifically wrote documenting about the miracle. He calls it literally God's gift day. And he's actually talking about Dionysus's what do you call it? Epiphany. He calls it an epiphany, that Dionysus appeared for 7 days. The water now flows with wine from a spring. And I had apologists trying to tell me that this isn't water into wine. And I'm like, okay, bro, like how deep do you want to take this? It was water. Now for 7 days, it is wine. Right. It's 7 days, I believe, which is odd. Like, I'm not going to say that the numbers necessarily correlate in some identical way, but like what Epiphanius says, and I don't want to get lost in this, but to make it funny, interesting observation, is Epiphanius is awesome, because not that we agree with him, but he's funny. I love watching him just take jabs at these people, because he's leaving us so much gold. It's thou doth protest way too much, bro. You literally just told us stuff that modern apologists want to hide. Okay. They don't want to go there. They don't want to see. And totally, they'll just dismiss it either way. Oh, well, he's late, as if these guys aren't working off earlier traditions and sources. Right. But Epiphanius says that even to this day, on a certain day, that same day, the Nones of Janus, that's January the 6th, the night of the 5th to the 6th, which is celebrated as the birth, the wedding at Cana, and I can't remember the third. I think the baptism of John. All three get tied and anchored to this one date by Jesus in the tradition of Christianity today. Christianity. I don't know what the Essenes would have, I doubt they would have practiced this, but because I don't even know if they tie into the virgin birth stuff. But anyway, this whole thing, he said that the rivers run with wine on this day. And he says this is evidence of the miracle of Jesus. And I'm like, has this dude read Pliny the Elder? Because Pliny the Elder says on this day, Dionysus is literally having an epiphany, and there's wine now coming from springs. You get this from Diodorus Siculus with rivers that run with wine. Like, bro, this dude has been doing the wine trick for a minute, is all I'm saying. And like, what's up?
Well, speaking of the wine thing, that's just another aspect to this. I was talking about this recently to my friend Scott that I just mentioned, who has the Church of the Nazarene. I believe I have to look up his YouTube channel one more time, but he's got a YouTube channel where he's talking about this material as well. And we were discussing the idea of how, Christspiracy is heavily focused on treatment of animals, animal sacrifice, this whole tradition. But the wine thing comes in as well when you really kind of think about like the Nazarite vow, which is definitely linguistically separate in the kind of Hebrew from the Netzer, but there are more connections than not. And
scholars have thought the Nazarene has some correlation with Nazarite, which Samson, for those who don't know the story, don't cut your hair, don't drink wine.
Right.
Why? What's wrong with the vine? What's wrong with the grape?
Well, Well, so interestingly, again, I'm trying to give all my homies shout outs. My buddy Chris that I mentioned before, Church of Ebionite Church of Christian Mysticism. He just did a great laying out the Syriac version of the Gospel of Luke. It's the Evangelion Demfresh or something. I can't remember. We don't have to waste our time pulling it up right now. It'll take a minute. But bottom line, there's a Syriac version of the Gospel of Luke, where in Luke 21:34, I think is the verse, Jesus famously is warning about the end times. And he says, be careful to not get involved with drunkenness and dissipation and anxiety, because the day will come upon you like a snare. Right.
Right.
Well, in this Syriac version, which actually scholars have dated to 2nd century because of the language, the type of Syriac that's being used, it has Jesus saying, do not let your heart become heavy with the drinking of the eating of flesh, the drinking of wine, and anxieties of the world. And this kind of is really more so a callback to, I believe it's Proverbs, where it says, don't let yourself get involved with over drinkers and people overeating flesh.
Right.
And it's really a call to this like Nazarite vow understanding that these gluttonous, overindulgence things dim your consciousness, dim your connection to God, whatever way you want to look at it. This is what Daniel, again, circling back to Daniel and our matrix point before we went to your outro there, is that Daniel's red pill out of the matrix, out of Babylon, was refusing the flesh and the wine.
This is an important point of your story I really liked about the documentary, and I have to commend you. That was really cool, where you're calling up the Daniel Fast Christian Company, and they're selling meat, and they're saying, "Oh, eat this meat," and you're like, "Bro, did you read the book of Daniel? I read the book of Daniel," and you're like he doesn't eat meat. He eats like beans and bread and like I think beans or something like very basic. It's like
pulses in water. I mean, seed bearing plant or
Okay, so it's like not any meat, and he fattened more health to him than everyone in the story. So I like this idea. I guess as we're rounding off, I want you to comment on that too, because I think that's important. But like as we're rounding off this episode, I think we have more in us. I think we have a lot more in us here. There's too much in us,
right?
In order to, we'd be here all night. But maybe you round it off with this Daniel thing and what you're suggesting that goes back, because you hinted at the Shapira scroll, you hinted at Ross Nichols' book. There's something going on. Tie this loose thread, starting with Daniel, back to what you and the group of people are suspecting about this whole motif. And then we will get to super chats and have a little fun as we exit. If that's cool with you.
that's great. And how about this? I'll do all of that, and I'll button it up with the red heifer at the end, because that's how we started this whole conversation. So what's being posited is that a figure like Daniel is someone who's truly walking in the utmost form of justice and righteousness, which is repetitively talked about over and over again. Dr. Tabor refers to this in his book, The Restoration of the Abrahamic Faith. And he just came out with a new edition of it as well, by the way, but Restoring the Abrahamic Faith. And it's this idea of the true way, which is justice and righteousness. And that at the heart of that is this thing that's really communicated later by Jesus: do unto others as you would have done unto you. Love God and love others, and others, even including not just human others, but animal others. They're others too. And that this whole concept really goes back to dominion, to the first mandate of humanity as laid out in the creation narrative, that humanity is this, again, whether you believe it as a literal thing, if you're that fundamentalist, or whether you believe it as an allegorical or even maybe say philosophical thing, the idea is that this dominion mandate is really the true first commandment in a way. And what it is that we've got this created world around us. And the best thing we can do is, as the superior species, if you will, at the top of the hierarchy with this image of God, or let's call it reason, logos, ability to empathize, etc., we shouldn't be using that skill to like dominate, terrorize, and harm others. We should be using it actually completely flip. Jesus, right? He flips the hierarchy always. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. It's all about service to others. And what I see, and I feel, Ross, Tabor, all the people we've been talking about on this chat, is that this sacrificial element in the scripture is this other voice forcing its way in through priestly ritual, other types of, like you mentioned the word, like occult magic, black magic, ritual, sorcery, war god energy. That isn't what these prophets believed was the true way of God. And they were always trying to pull humanity back to the purest, most righteous form, the way of the wilderness, the two paths, the way of life versus the way of death. So I say all that.
I want to comment quickly, and I just think about where we're headed. It makes me just think about it in a John Dominic Crossan sense, because I can hear Dr. Tabor in my head right now, and he loves Dom. Dom lives down the road from me. Dom is 90, 5. He's on his way out soon, having his apotheosis. But he would say, look at this in an evolutionary, scientific, factual base, and then try to interpret the Bible this way. And I like his reasoning, because he goes, look at this. Look at the pollution. Look at the cities. Look at what kind of like you back up. I know you've seen maps of cities and how they look like a germ on the planet. Like it's like you go up and it's just like, what are we doing? Right? Is this really sustainable? And this is the question Dom would ask. It's a great question to ask. I like the reinterpretation. I want to just make my comment and then have you wrap things up into the red heifer, or however you want to end this. But here's my thing. I try to find the good in everything, and try to also see what I think is dated. And let's just realize it's dated. You can't really judge the past. I mean, you can, but my point is you can't change it. So we can learn from it and move forward. I'm sitting here looking at this stuff and I'm going, okay, it sounds to me like everyone, we look at earlier material and we interpret it. And there seems to be multiple groups that are finding themes that they're interpreting. So even if someone can't jump on your bandwagon, let's just say they're skeptical, they're cautious, and they say, look, man, I don't know if this blue thread is an intentional thread that really goes back to early people. There's a movement that goes way back there. If they can't jump on that, at least try to understand that later people reading this material, which might be a conglomerate of traditions and ideas, are looking for a single unified thread. And in doing so, they are acknowledging an aspect that I think you are identifying that is there. So whether or not they think there's this continuous movement that goes all the way back to when, laws were written and stuff like that, they could still jump on that later interpreters are looking at this material and finding those elements and saying, I'm pulling out the good. I call it eating the meat. What I've always done my whole life.
Meat Yeah, meat just means food in Old English, so you're good.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
come from a meat eating world,
Yeah.
right? What I've
So
always
do I. So do I, by the way. I'm glad you said that, because everyone who's listening is probably thinking, listen to this soy boy, whatever, saying all this. I want everyone to know that I come from the Deep South Bible Belt, like I said, and I was a hunter, a fisherman. I used to go down to Florida, not far from you, to Apalachicola, Florida, Mexico Beach, and I would go 40 miles offshore every summer catching boatloads of fish out of the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America now. Right. I think. And I also had, my stepdad owned a barbecue restaurant, all of my teenage years and everything. So when I first did my Daniel fast, it was actually really hard for me to do it. I didn't really want to cut out meat and all that. So this isn't at all from me coming from a judgmental place. And it's actually not really, as much as it sounds like it, it's not really about diet at the end of the day. And I think that's the way these groups saw it, is that diet's kind of a consequence. It's more about justice. Thou shalt not kill, original dominion, service to creatures as much as you can, to not kill unnecessarily. Right. So,
Right.
And then even in the creation narrative, animals aren't food anyways. They're just not. It's plants and herbs. So it's really not about a dietary choice.
Were potential companions for Adam. They were, even though
Exactly.
they weren't, they didn't match according to the story, but like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I'd love to like round it up, is talking about this, this whole red heifer story and where we are right now. Is, look, I said earlier in the first podcast that Henry David Thoreau has this quote that opens our film: there are thousands hacking at the branches of evil to one who's hacking at the root. And if we can hang our hat on the historicity of a temple event, or at minimum these Nazarenes, or whatever it is, like you said, maybe it's later groups writing back. What I see as a tradition hacking at the root. Like there's all these things: slavery, war, injustice. Like you mentioned, oh, I want sacrifices if you're feeding the poor and taking after the widow and this and that. Well, where do all these problems actually come from? And what I have seen from 15 years of researching this topic is, we've been talking scripture, but anthropologically, there are books and books on animal killing and domestication being a root cause issue to all of the world's greatest challenges right now. Biologically, we could talk it with the makeup of the human body, and that we're actually more frugivores. We've got opposable thumbs. We've got like everything points to the frugivore or herbivore side than it does to the carnivore side. Philosophically, the ethics are really hard to fight against. That's why some of the greatest minds in the world, time and time again, the who's who, all were either vegetarian or vegan or wound up that way at some point in their life. From Nikola Tesla to Leonardo da Vinci to Albert Einstein in modern times. But like you mentioned, Pythagoras and all of these older, Porphyry's writings on animal ethics are unbelievable. I mean, there's just no way to refute the arguments. So in every way, I think we've got something that to contend with, that if we really want to strike at the root and solve some of the issues, then whether you believe it or not as a reality, what we're talking about today with the Hebrew gospel and the Nazarenes or whatever, there's a philosophy here that I think is really powerful. And to your point, like Pythagoras and some of these other groups, they did have animal sacrifice way into their ancient history, and they were a reform movement. This kind of Pythagorean Platonic school, they began to question these things, and it was a positive. It's like, hey, that was barbarism.
That's true.
And
there was human sacrifice. Zeus, on the mountain of Zeus, they were killing humans. And we have implications. You go far enough back, Phoenicians, Canaanites, which I think, Israelites come out of. Either way, you see this archaic idea. And if you just take it from a completely non-religious view, just for my skeptics that might be hanging out in the back of the jacket, like
they're looking at, they're like, dude, this
guy's talking about Jesus here, man. I don't know if I like this, because sometimes we got chips on our shoulders, and trust me, I've carried a chip. I'm doing better now these days to just be myself, and don't take it too serious. Go ahead.
Two sentences just on that. I challenge any of those people, and you, Derek. This isn't really a challenge because we're friends, but I'm just saying, like, go look at the material, go research this stuff, really dig into everything. I've thought for a while that whether it's the mythicist train to the fundamentalist train to the critical biblical scholarship, whatever area or place you're in, for whatever reason, this topic is like very rarely discussed. You've got the outliers like Robert Eisenman and who is it? I forget the Hebrew gospel guy, James R. Edwards. Like, you've got some of these people that in these different disciplines will go there. But largely speaking, this is just a lost part of the greater narrative. And I think if more people saw that it was even there and just started to research it, you'll find, whoa, there's really something to this.
Yeah.
And it might change your life, if anything, at a philosophical level.
That was more than 2 sentences, bro.
Sorry.
No, let me make one comment about this. That I'm looking at it. If we put our religious baggage to the side and just purely look at it from a data point and an experiential point. When I was a kid, my BB gun, I went hunting with my BB gun, not a real gun, but BB gun around the neighborhood. And I remember I hit a squirrel. I was aiming to try, hit a squirrel. I'm like 10, 11, maybe 12. I mean, we grew up in the South too. So, mom and dad would hand you their BB guns and say, don't shoot any humans, but, and don't hit any houses, that kind of stuff. So I remember hitting a squirrel, and it's just one of many times where I'm hunting or I am fishing or whatever. And dude, watching the poor animal, like, it wasn't like I hit it and just stunned it. Like, this is a suffering animal that's right there, that's suffering. And I'm like crying as a little kid. Catching a fish, you're told, hit it in the head, try to keep it from suffering when you go to eat it. We do it on camping. I felt bad. I just did. I just inherently felt bad. Now, I could see if I practice this enough, I will desensitize myself to the violence of doing this to animals. So it just seems logical, especially when you hear these amazing, crazy serial killer shows that we always watch about how this little kid started with animals.
Yep.
They started with strangling and dissecting animals. Then they work into the humans. And you start going, whoa, whoa, whoa. What is this phenomena that leads to the violence and blood and death of an animal, then leads to humans? And I kind of wonder if we were able to somehow, as humans, I don't know the answer. This is above my pay grade, but it seems logical to me. If we reduced the killing of the animals in some way, I can't say it'll ever completely go away, but it would be amazing if we reduced it. I imagine statistically the violence that comes out with human on war, the war that we have with humans might reduce if our violence that goes to the not so human animal species is now being tamed or tolerated. So I look at this completely from a secular angle and say, this is, hey, amen, amen. That's how I feel about this. I think this is a commendable observation, and it's worthy of further investigation. It needs to be talked about more because I think we all want peace. I think everyone wants that. I would imagine. I'd hope,
Well, here's my closing words then on that. To bring up the red heifer as not only a relevant cultural event that's facing us right now, but as a metaphor. You've got, it's 5 heifers, right? But it's really one who's going to be sacrificed to initiate this temple build. And what you have there is an example, a very condensed, hyper concentrated example of an animal death leading to all of this conflict, war. Like I said, you've got 2 sides of this conflict surrounding that event. They want the same piece of property. War, capital, land ownership, slavery. So many things can be extrapolated from this event and from this kind of ideology that comes along with it, and eschatology that comes along with it. That's such a great example of what happens in a secular sense that we talked about earlier, that this killing X leads to, Z or whatever. And what I would say to that is, we're just talking about one animal in that sense. But I want to remind everyone that 90 billion land animals are killed every single year in the animal agriculture industry. And check this out, 99% of them are in factory farms. Like, that's the part I think a lot of people don't understand. 90 billion is a huge number. That's like killing the human population 10 times over every year, if we equated it to humans. But not only are they just being killed, but 99% of them are in the worst conditions imaginable. I think most people would condemn factory farming. Even Joe Rogan, who's like a full meathead, right? He's like totally condemns factory farming and thinks it's abhorrent. It's literally hell on earth. The animals are forcibly impregnated. You know, their birth they're forcibly impregnated. Their birth is forced. Their death is forced. And usually really young. Almost all of them only live to about 3 months to 6 months old or whatever, sometimes younger. And that time in between is just suffering. It's confinement, chipping, tracking, being pumped full of antibiotics and hormones, you name it. And these are all the things that if there's any freedom fighters out there, truthers or whoever that are like worried about government overreach, being confined, all these things, we're doing that to animals. So this boomerang karmic effect is just coming back on us. So we have to look at like what we're doing, what we do unto others is done unto us, you know, in that law, like Jesus says. So all that to say, I think we need to not only look at what ritual we put on our plate every day and kind of consider that. I don't want to be judgmental or be pushy on anyone. Just think about, like you said, reduce whatever. And at the same time, we've got this kind of symbolic, metaphoric example of this in the red heifer. And I really feel it would be awesome to see maybe more people talk about not letting this happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know what
do you need it for. You've been in the diaspora forever. Like, come on, you're content. What the heck? Live the religion you have. Don't do this. I think it's chaotic. And I don't think that it's going to be in the long run. I don't think it's wise, but I'm also thinking about the cruelty because I've seen decapitations on video of humans. I've also seen animals. And I think to myself, like, bro, this is the most gruesome thing to watch, and think to myself, how could I make that normal in my religious activity, to think that's normal, like without having magic thinking that this blood and some weird kind of strange superstition. I just personally am like, get rid of that, dude. What are we doing? We're 2025. I think we should try to move on. That's what I've been fighting against in a lot of ways with apologetics. Is like, you know, some of the stuff that they defend, to find a way to make slavery not slavery or whatever. Yeah. We should move past some of these ancient practices. So well, my buddy James Benefico, who's on the Jesus Way podcast with Aaron, and I join it sometimes. He said something to me that's always stuck with me because I know it really well in my community back in Georgia. All the Southern Bible Belt Christians trip out every couple of months when they find an altar with blood and bones and everything spread on it, because there's people that do this kind of ritual killing, and you know, whatever practice, they'll label it satanic, witchcraft, whatever. But that's the real litmus test there. Like, if you, Derek, or if anyone listening were to go in your woods next to your house right now and walk in, and you come upon an altar with blood splatter all over it and a skull and like smoke and incense, what's your first thought? Bro, you don't even need my answer.
But how then, if that's the reaction, how then do we
let Dexter out? Why is Dexter not in prison right now? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, totally. Yeah, it reminds me of True Detective, that first episode when they come up on anyways. But that said, why is it that then somehow in this Hebrew biblical context is actually like holy? It's just a weird. So that's a great litmus test of like, is this what God ever really wanted? And then that's when you can really go and start to see that blue thread when you just ask, is God? This is my real last word, and then I'll leave it on this. You mentioned, who was it that you just mentioned a second ago? Oh, Crossan. Another person like Crossan that I think is really interesting to listen to in this regard is Rupert Sheldrake. You familiar with Rupert? So Rupert Sheldrake is he's a what's the discipline called where they study like quantum physics? I guess he's like a quantum physicist, maybe. Super smart guy, but he's now ironically become he's like a Anglican priest. I don't think he practices or whatever, but he's joined the Church of England or whatever. Why? Because he went really down the rabbit hole in this morphogenetic resonance theory. And again, I'm not going to get too into it, but it's the kind of 100th monkey theory, this law of critical mass, that like when one species starts to pick up a trait, all the other individuals of that species immediately take it on instantaneously without having learned that trait before. And that maybe there's this morphogenetic resonant field that our data or our consciousness exists on, et cetera. Really, really high level philosophical stuff. But he recently talked about in a video where he was being interviewed talking with Terrence McKenna. It's a really, really old cut. It's an amazing video. They used to chat back at Esalen here in California, and they're talking about animal sacrifice and this idea that I think there's a book called Blood Rights or Blood Right written by this woman. I can't remember her name, but it's a really famous book on the topic. And that this concept of the sacrifice comes from the idea that humans actually weren't originally the top of the food chain. They were prey to like bigger cats and such. And so when humans are trying to get away, they're actually running from trying to be preyed on by other larger predators. One would get caught and eaten. And just like you see an antelope with lions or whatever, once one gets caught, the rest can escape. Yeah. That's the sacrifice. And so there's this holy, deeply programmed intrinsic thing of like, thank you so much. We all get to survive because of, but then what does that mean?
Oh, wow. Makes me think of Game of Thrones. I was just watching on the north side of the wall where they give the infants to the Ice King. I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones at all, but like the Jon Snow sees this thing happening where this picks up this baby and it's like, and then clubbed over the head, and he has to explain to him, no, this is a sacrifice so we don't have to deal with the wrath of this Ice King and his army and stuff. It's just crazy.
Right.
But,
right. And that's the idea. And that's where they kind of go with it in the conversation. And Rupert talks a lot about this on his podcast called the Sheldrake Vernon Dialogues with Mark Vernon, who I actually did an interview with right after Christspiracy went in theaters. Really, really cool interview because he was really skeptical about the Nazarene thing. And he's a theologian. And we talked about it and I showed him the source material. And by the end, he was like, whoa. But he's friends with Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake says this whole idea of sacrifice. Then what does that mean if that's the program? Then we then put that on God. Oh, God's a predator. God's like this predator that we have to, and that's where the wrath, the penal substitution, all these things come in. And so I think we're at this crossroads where we understand that much of that, you know, in the Christian tradition is more written about in the Pauline and later tradition. You don't find it in a lot of the earlier texts, you know, now that we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls and yada, 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 this idea. Even I said this to Wes and Stephen in our debate and they kind of hopped over it and didn't answer. But even if you take the Levitical priestly law at face value, in Leviticus 5:11, it says that you can give grain for sin atonement. So there's no blood necessary if you're poor. So
it's kind of funny because this is a skeptical argument. A lot of skeptics in my arena will challenge the Christian notion of the sacrifice that's needed. And they'll go, you know, like there are places where God just forgives. Like it didn't require, like it just was a change of heart. And then God forgave them. In certain passages, it's clear that there wasn't even a need for a sacrifice or some type of necessary, you know, sacrifice in that sense, right? You could say giving up something is a sacrifice. And that is another form of it. Giving up something that is a pleasure or something like that. That could be a form of like, hey, I'm showing a change in my heart and that's enough by my action. And anyway, I just thought that was an interesting point. So, okay, we're going to keep going and going if we don't.
Yeah, we are. Let's wrap it up. How are we going to end it?
Super chats real quick. I'm the famous shameless plug. Everyone knows this. Whether that's to my detriment or my success, it doesn't matter. Go check out Christspiracy. You can watch this right now. I'm going to put it this way, for free. Okay. You can watch this. You will enjoy it. It's 100 minutes long. Very well edited. Very interesting. They go all over the world in literally various traditions. There's a lot of flying you do. In fact, me talking to you on WhatsApp, you're always like, hey man, I'm flying down to such and such. And I'm like, I've never even been there. Like that's wild. Okay. So watch this movie. If you like it and you appreciate it, man, they appreciate you paying it forward. It helps other people. Remember, they did not bow the knee, so to speak, to the Netflix and others expecting them to cut stuff out. So they ended up doing this themselves. Very professionally done. Also subscribe to Christspiracy. I put the YouTube channel in the comment section so you can go support my friend here. Check him out live. There's 57 watching on his end. Let's make those numbers grow. And then also the Moses Scroll book by Ross Nichols. We brought that up earlier in case you want to check out some interesting history about what's going on. And even the 10 Commandments have been tampered with. Okay, so once you know that even the 10 Commandments have been like played with amongst these traditions, it's worth investigating further. Okay,
right.
Couple supers. We'll start from the top. There's this guy. We don't know who this is. Just kidding. Ross Nichols. He wrote the book I just showed you. Here we go. The mother frickin' Wendyberg. You've been nothing but amazing. Thank you for being here, being a member, everything you've done. I really appreciate your friendship. Mario Marufo. Forgive me if I butchered your name. Patriarchal society is class society. The society of the master-slave dialectic and of human sacrifice. To overcome it, we need working class revolution. I don't know. It's above my head of understanding all of this, but.
Well, that's what I will say. I mean, I'm kind of taking it at face value of what I think it means. Working class revolution. I think a lot about, we mentioned Judas the Galilean, the tax revolt. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time with this whole temple system. And I think that system, again, metaphorically can be extrapolated to what we see today with the Federal Reserve and the Vatican and the political systems and this and that. It's like it's been extrapolated out and it's just larger now. Right. And so, I think they're like the taxation system in America, at least. One thing that people might be surprised by, to pull it into this topic, is there's like $300 billion a year that are sent to animal agriculture. And it's at least 100 times more money of our tax dollars sent to animal agriculture than plant agriculture. So there's like no room to innovate, to like make more solutions for the plant-based side of things. And then almost all of our 77% of cropland is fed to animals to fatten them up. So I say all that to say, when I think working class, I think about people doing their best and they're getting taxed and the government. So I think we gotta do some Judas the Galilean tax revolting too.
Right. Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. 85 million people sacrificed during World War II to the war god religion. Non-agrarian Israelite priests always ate the sacrifice.
Hey, that one speaks for itself. I don't know what you can say to that, but yeah, I mean, death, the way of life and the way of death.
Yeah. Essene Ebionite Church of Christian Mysticism. Is this your boy?
Yeah, that's my boy. Everybody go follow him.
Go follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Cam is the real deal. He walks the walk. Derek, ask Cam about Luke 21:34 from the Evangelion da Nephoreshi.
Yep, that's what I brought up, where Luke 24 in the Syriac has Jesus saying, don't let your heart become heavy with the eating of flesh and drinking of wine and the anxieties of the world. So everyone, if you want a breakdown of that and how ridiculously profound and early this text is, go check out Chris's channel here. And he's got a video. It's one of his recent 2 videos where he breaks this down. It's really, really, really profound.
I'm finding it right now, just getting his channel pulled up here. All right, so this is it. I'm subscribing. I'm going to share it in the chat just so if anybody wants to go subscribe, you can do so right now.
Yep. All right. Yeah, he's got 2 videos on the Syriac, Luke, and it's pretty awesome. There it is. Cool. Vegetarian and anti-sacrifice verses. That's it.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Cool. Okay. That's cool. Go subscribe to him. Wait a minute. What? Thank you for the super chat. Wasn't Abel praised for his animal sacrifice in the beginning? Confused how it's a reflection of the beginning. I thought God liked barbecue. So you can see why someone would think God likes the barbecue,
Yeah. And that's basically what Epiphanius was saying in his refutation of the heretical Nazarene sect. But so there's a couple ways that I look at this. So if we look at the text at face value, what's really interesting is the text never says God commands Abel to do a sacrifice. It does say that an angel of the Lord, right, or a messenger commands him or tests him to kill his own son, but then stops him. But the text never says that God tells him, here's a ram. It says that Abraham finds the ram, sees the ram, and sacrifices it. And then Abraham says the Lord has provided. So one could, at face value, interpret it as man putting his own traditions and interpretation and reflection onto God. But the deeper, you can pull that up if you'd like and or whatever, but the deeper thing I would say is this could be another one of these, red threads from the priestly tradition that made its way in. When you think about documentary hypothesis and the ways that these texts were compiled, whatever belief you have around that, the Nazarenes, like I said, seem to believe that the original Torah didn't have this stuff, that it said specifically that it believes in all the patriarchs, but that stories have been forged in their name,
right,
specifically around this topic. They were specific. This is the forgery.
This is an important point to bring out. Okay. So again, that's why I brought up the other position earlier, saying maybe later people are reading and finding the aspects, and maybe they are identifying a debate, because it does go back at least to whoever's authoring some of these books, Jeremiah and stuff, when they talk about the lying pen of the scribes.
There you go.
This is a huge internal thou doth protest too much kind of thing for the fundamentalist. Okay.
Yeah.
The Bible itself is telling you that other writers, other scribes, which is exactly what he is, he's writing material, they are fabricating or lying, as they would say. It's almost like the argument of forged by Bart Ehrman in a way, where Paul is writing a letter and he's like, don't trust the other letter. It's a forged letter. And a lot of scholars go, dude, the letter that's telling you not to trust the other letter itself is a forgery, by the way. So like, again, there's something going on between the writers.
Ross is going to kick my butt that I didn't bring up Jeremiah 8:8. I can't believe I didn't do that. I think I said it so many times in the debate with Wes that I'm not saying it as much anymore because I'm kind of tired of hearing myself. Yeah, Jeremiah 8:8. The lying pen of the scribes has falsified the Torah. And even before it, it says, who are you to say that you have the law? Right? He's kind of calling out the priesthood there when the lying pen of the scribes has handled it falsely.
Let me, what verse you said? 8:8?
Yeah, Jeremiah 8, verse 8. How can you say
yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, how can you say we are wise, for we have the law of the Lord, the Torah, when actually the lying pen of the scribes has handled it falsely? And really, when you look at the Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken, it's more directly has falsified it. And it's literally the pen. So like, again, I brought this up in the West debate. I talk about this, like you said, it's a big challenge for fundamentalist Christians, inerrancy kind of conversations. And the walk around is like, oh, well, they handled it falsely and that they weren't really acting it out purely in the way it was intended. But Jeremiah specifies the pen. Right.
Right. So like somebody's writing things that are clearly not not trustworthy, but this is why textual criticism exists, because it's not just about, is there a unified blue thread or red thread or whatever. It's that there is clear discrepancy in material that's a no-brainer that scholars can identify and go, that guy clearly didn't write this. This seems to be in contrary to that. But yeah, anyway,
well, can I say on that too, what you're going to really love, Derek, given your theory, you say you've been working out with that book or that piece that you're working on, is in addition to what is that?
My documentary, my little movie I'm putting together.
Your documentary. Yeah. Check it out. Ezekiel, and this is a Ross Nichols little nugget he dropped on me too, just blew my mind. Ezekiel 22:26 and Zephaniah 3:4 both reference violence. There's your word, violence being done to the law. Violence. They did violence to the law is the wording there.
Her priests do violence to my law and profane my holy things. They do not distinguish between the holy and common. They teach that there's no difference between the unclean and clean. They shut their eyes to keeping of my Sabbath, so that I am profaned among them. And then the other passage?
Zephaniah 3:4.
3 verse 4. Her prophets are unprincipled. They are treacherous people. Her priests profane the sanctuary and violence to the law. That's in the temple. So you can't pretend some of these elites didn't find their pin into some of this material that we're reading, or you could pretend that you just have this protected bubble that, magically no one made their way in,
Right. And the way to look at that is like, okay, does violence to the law mean that kind of more broad, I guess, traditional fundamentalist reading that, oh, they're violating it because they're not following it, in the sense that they're not handling it in that way? Or are they doing violence to the Torah because literally they're falsifying it?
Right.
Or even more, are they literally doing violence in that they're adding violence, animal sacrifice, into the Torah? Like there's so many layers at which you could kind of understand what did they really mean by when they said that, especially given the context of Jeremiah, etc. So anyhow.
Yeah. And I've even heard it said from academics, and then we'll move to the next one, is that the priest who wrote the priestly material had all of the incentive to incorporate this, because, mind you, their money-making machine is due to you bringing a sacrifice to them for good fortune for the next year, for all that comes with this practice. So it's almost like the church pastor walking up, whose entire job is commissioned on your tithes, and then literally just preaching anti-tithal messages all day. Like, he's not going to have a successful business. It's counterintuitive to his position and what he is. So when scribes are working overtime to make sure you bring those animals to the temple, not only so they can eat, because the priests participate in eating the sacrifice with God, depending on the sacrifice, but the money that comes with it. So yeah, I would say money, follow the power.
Big time. They're really like, it's a great analogy is big pharma. Obviously, like, modern medicine has great benefits to it, but when you get that idea like a big pharma scheme or plot where there's like a drug company that's just trying to do sick care in the sense that they want people to be sick and not get to the root cause so they can keep selling their medication, it's like there's all these 613 laws that you can violate in the Torah, and leprosy and all these things. And so when you've got any of these problems, the only way to fix them is you got to go to the temple and sacrifice. And that costs money. You either have to, there's even a tax at the temple tax system, where they make extra money on changing the money, which is the whole money changers idea in the text. So yeah, it's a big money-making scheme. And at that, in that sense, you're right, that I think that the reason why these prophets and this side of the blue thread doesn't really get understood is because it's still kind of in some ways being perpetuated today under various new guises, if you will.
Interesting. So it clearly goes against some of what they already practice. Solera Knight, again, thank you for the super chat. 2 black hairs, spoiled red heifer. What symbolism?
Yeah, that was what Ross said to me after I was like, have you seen this? And he's like, yeah. So the heifers are spoiled, which kind of in a way means God spoiled them. Like, God caused those hairs to grow, but then they still sacrificed it. That seems like that seems like a lawbreaker right there. That can't be right. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, it's the symbolism. I don't know specifically what you mean by the black hairs, but yeah, there's the irony of like they're waiting to get this perfect unblemished thing. And, I often talk about, or we talk about, just praying that they sprout some kind of other hair color. Maybe we can go spray paint them or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what we need to do. Freak them out and paint them all white. What the? Mario, thank you again for the super chat. Next time someone asks why I'm vegan, I'll say it's because I'm a secular Buddha, and they will say, you mean secular Buddhist? And I will say, no. I don't get it. Do you?
I think he's comparing Christianity versus Jesus. Maybe he's making a parallel there.
Mario, help me out if you're in the chat. I don't understand. I'm trying to. If you're still here, it's been a minute.
I'm thinking he's saying, like, if someone were to ask me why I'm vegan, I would say because I'm a secular, or I'm a follower of Jesus. And they're like, you mean you're a Christian? And I say, no, I don't know. Sounds like what he's saying, but I'm not quite sure.
Oh, someone's saying that they think he means I'm the second Buddha.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Thank you. Mr. Warlight, the Jews who revered Joshua ben Jehozadak As the branch from Zechariah 6 were called Nazarenes, meaning branchians. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I haven't had a ton of time to look into the modern renditions of the Nazarenes. Some of my friends I've mentioned in the podcast have, but it's kind of like everything else when it comes to like later Reformation, Restoration movements, where it's maybe not as based on some of this actual textual material that we're talking about today. So I don't think there's a direct line with a lot of these modern groups, to my knowledge. I could be wrong. I'll have to go and look a little bit deeper into this Joshua ben Jehozadak guy. But that's why, like I said, there's more. The people that I brought up on the podcast, there's a lot of people that are talking about this. And again, it's not like we all found each other because we looked at the material and we're like, wait a minute. It's kind of like you and Neil, it's like, wait a minute. You came, whoa, you know that? And it's like,
yeah,
on our separate journeys, completely unbeknownst, like we have no other thing, like same thing with Ross, like all these, there's just this movement where people in their own individual lives started asking these core questions and all kind of wound up in the same place, but through different means. So we're just discussing it, and who knows, will it become a new church? I don't know. But hey, if it is, we need a Moses, Derek. So I don't know if you're.
Listen, it's going to cost you a lot. I'm going to need you to bring sacrifices and money. I'm just kidding. No, you have become one with all to be Buddha. So I think that might be what they're trying to say. Is they're not a Buddhist. They're just trying to say, no, I'm becoming one with all. I don't know.
Okay.
Just figure
I and the Father are one.
Right. I fish in a tie. Thank you for the super chat. How many animals are murdered by halal per day? You cover this in the documentary. There's way more. It's like 1 point something billion.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I don't know the exact numbers. That'd be a fun chat GPT, and then you'd have to fact check it. But what I do know is it's $1 trillion industry, halal, and the certifications too, the process, there's so much corruption. And bottom line, I know from a lot of my friends that I know that are Muslim that the halal thing is like very serious. They take it very serious. And most of them don't know that due to the numbers of animals being fed through these systems that they think are halal, it's impossible for them to actually keep the practices, and they're not. So similarly, there's a lot of people in like rabbinic Judaism now that are going vegetarian or vegan for kosher reasons, because the modern animal agriculture it's impossible to keep it actually kosher. So yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of animals killed for halal.
Thank you for that super chat. Nemo History, thank you for the super chat. Parallels and prophetic insight via intramancy versus hearing an internal voice to dietary rift. Julian Jaynes' theory of the origin of consciousness. I don't know about this. Do you?
I don't, but it sounds interesting. Very interesting.
Never heard of it. Thank you for the super chat, though.
What I will say, I don't know if that's at all what he means, but call it placebo, call it whatever you want to say. But ever since I started doing the Daniel fast, for sure, something in my cognitive awareness, ability to connect dots and see things different in a, dare I say, like, I don't know, serendipitous, prophetic, like just seeing things in a different way, has actually increased. I feel that there's a connection to it, because you're really, meat flesh is like really dense. It's heavy. It's like when you eat Thanksgiving turkey and all that, and afterwards you're like about to fall asleep.
Right.
Plant-based food in a way has kind of a vibrance and a vitality that lifts you into a space where you can actually think more clearly. But I don't know if that's what he means. It kind of sounds like it.
Okay. I don't know. TWPB, thank you for the super sticker. Appreciate that. Chris Pham, thank you for the super chat. If there's one thing I would say to anyone on my deathbed, it would be to watch Christspiracy. That's
all
funny.
right.
Oh, Chris. Oh man, what if you got a video one day mailed to you, like a VHS or a DVD or something like old, like, and you're older, and there's like, this is my last words, and like there's this guy on the bed going, listen here, Cameron. Yeah. I want you to know about Christspiracy. Oh man, that'd be funny.
Hey, to be fair, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 99% sure that that's my wife's brother.
Oh.
So thank you, Chris. But what's hilarious, it doesn't take away from the validity to it, because he was a, big time consumer of animals and raised Coptic Orthodox and all of that. And he's recently been really blown away by the film. It took him a little while to see it. And then when he saw it, it's really made a massive impact on his life. So thanks, Chris. If that's you, I'm pretty sure it's you.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Harold Barr with awesome live chat. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. Look, we're going to wrap things up here because we did 3.5 hours because the first hour
I'm sweating,
bro. Azazel came in, kicked my ass. And then we got a second chance. The Enochian, angelic beings ascended and took us with us. So, okay. What would you like to say? Because I think we have more to get into in these sources and all this stuff in the future. We can dive into this fun, especially when it comes to Hebrew Matthew. I'd like to pull on that thread with you at some point. Maybe you and Aaron, because you guys have been like really infatuated with this material. And tell Aaron I'm game. I'm all for interesting, cool stuff like this. Like,
absolutely. So, he might be listening right now. So if you hear this, Aaron, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more that we can talk about. So I would just say, everybody watch Christspiracy. If it hasn't already been sold hard enough, just check it out. I will say it's a film that is designed to keep this type of material entertaining. So it's edited in such a way with a lot of verite, kind of in the real time stuff. Therefore, the source material that we dived into today, Christspiracy is only scratching the surface of that conversation. So watch it for the entertainment value. You're going to still learn so much about all the different threads that we didn't even really discuss, like the Islam and Hinduism and Judaism, kosher, etc. But once that surface is scratched by watching it, yes, Derek, we can do a follow-up where we go into these materials. I don't know if Neil would want to at some point, I want the source guys to really hammer us. I want to get hammered on this and really figure out, are we just making this up? Is this as solid or not solid? Like, what's going on here? And so that would be cool to go into that and really kind of break that down. I'll tell you what, whether it's another pod with Ross or even Dr. Tabor is really, I think, now in this time in his life where he's retired and everything, I think he's ready to really go harder on what he really sees with this material in this early, first and second century pre-Christian movement. So I think getting that out to everyone would be really, really cool. Yeah, let's do it.
Just sneak peek, we are working on doing a pre-Paul Christianity course. And so when that comes, dude, we'll have to promote that, get that out there, let people be able to join it. And the cool thing about James in his course is he's not really retired. I mean, he's retired, but he actually is still a professor. He is actually teaching a group of students and is directly connected with them. And so if we do a course on this, he'll walk people through it. He has private Zoom meetings with them. And it's a blast, and he records them. So if you miss it, you can catch up on it and all that fun stuff. So there's no time restraint on what you can watch when you sign up. People go sign up later when he stopped doing courses on his earlier courses, and they can catch up on all of those. And he oftentimes will give those, whatever course you sign up with, he'll invite you sometimes to the other course. He's awesome. Good guy.
Yeah. That man never stops moving. He's I don't know how he does it. He's just keeps going and going and going. He's doing so many things all at once.
In Israel, when we were walking, dude, it's hard to keep up with him. He literally walks fast. Solera Knight wrote, the manna of the Bible is a psychedelic mushroom. I'll let that be the last comment if that's cool with you, and then we'll wrap things up.
Hey, the possibilities are endless. I think that there's a interesting kind of parallel that you see when you think the way that it's described, and the fact you open this live stream with the phrase "Holy cow!"
Holy cow!
And there's a bit of a kind of understanding in the Vedic tradition or the Hindu tradition that the cows became so holy and worshipped because the feces grew psychedelic mushrooms, which was a part of a certain sacrament in the Far East at that time or whatever. I think Marco Allegro's work goes into some of this kind of stuff. And But the Israelites were following around their livestock in that story in the desert. And if they're pooping all over the place and something's coming up with the morning dew, it kind of sounds like a mushroom. But hey,
Yeah,
who knows? Who knows? There's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down with that one. And they're seeing God in the clouds and everything. So I don't know.
Could be tripping in the desert in this story. No, but I really appreciate you. I'm glad we finally did this, and it's time to do it again. I'm in this crunch time of buying our new home, so forgive me on that. But I want to have you come back, man. Let's dig into Matthew. Let's dig into anything else too. Like there's always some interesting stuff we can cover. I appreciate you, and I hope everybody goes from MythVision. Follow Cameron. Check him out at his YouTube. Check out the documentary. Any last words from you?
Just thank you, man. Really appreciate you having me on. And it's been a little bit coming. I know we were talking all the way back before even the debate and everything. And I'm so glad that it lined up right now with this whole red heifer piece, because I think it's the perfect framing for this conversation, because it takes something that's so like ancient and it's now still somehow relevant in this way. So really appreciate you giving me that time. And you know what? We'll see. We'll go through all these materials and everything, and who knows, just be careful. You might be a Nazarene or an Ebionite by the end of it. That's what I'll say.
Hey, you never know. You never know. No, seriously, man, I appreciate you. And ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.